Chapter 2296. Yao Xiangju and Zhuowen silently watched as Kuang Li fused the Dao fruit with the phagocytosis. He memorized Kuang Li's every move. Zhuowen had a total of 4 Dao fruits. His original plan was to fuse all 4 with the phagocytosis, but he knew that if he exposed too much of such a precious treasure, it would be detrimental to him. Even though Zhuowen had taken out 1 Dao fruit, Zhuowen could see the greed in Kuang Grit's eyes. If Kuang Grit knew that Zhuowen had 4 Dao fruits on him, this old man would probably tear off all pretense of cordiality and snatch them away. Zhuowen wanted to watch Kuang Li's refining process with his own eyes because he wanted to learn all of Kuang Li's techniques. When the time came, he could try to fuse the Dao fruit with the phagocytosis. The flames burned the phagocytosis for 6 hours. Then Kuang Li squeezed his right hand, took out the phagocytosis, and suspended it 5 meters above his head. Then Kuang Li took out the Dao fruit. His gaze suddenly turned serious. Wild Gravel took out a lot of materials from his spirit ring and burned them into liquid. Then the liquid instantly wrapped around the Dao fruit. The surface of the Dao fruit was extremely powerful. The moment the liquid touched the Dao fruit, a part of it was annihilated. However, Kuang Li had expected this. He used his surging divine power to suppress the Dao fruit, keeping the liquid on the surface of the Dao fruit in balance. Fuse. Kuang Li's gaze was extremely serious. With a low shout, he immediately brought the Dao fruit closer to the phagocytosis. When the phagocytosis and the Dao fruit finally touched, a crackling sound rang out. Then, the liquid on the Dao fruit's surface began to fuse with the phagocytosis. Zhuowen could clearly see the Dao fruit slowly enter the phagocytosis along with the liquid. It was as if the Dao fruit and the liquid had become one. Before long, the liquid completely fused with the phagocytosis. The Dao fruit also followed the liquid into the phagocytosis. The phagocytosis buzzed. A powerful Dao rhyme circulated on the phagocytosis's surface. Then, the phagocytosis suddenly flew out and landed in Zhuowen's hand. Zhuowen's eyes shone as he looked at the phagocytosis in his hand. His heart was filled with excitement. He could feel that with this Dao rhyme, the phagocytosis's power definitely surpassed that of a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Now that you've added Dao fruits into your divine tool, I'm afraid its power has increased quite a bit. In my opinion, it should be superior to a secondary heaven-breaking divine tool, but it's still a bit weaker than a Dao-proving divine tool. Unless you can add even more Dao fruits into it, there's a chance that this thing can transform into a Dao-proving divine tool. Kuang Li looked at the devouring seal in Zhuowen's hand with satisfaction. Clearly, he was very satisfied with this refinement. Thank you, Master Kuang Li. Zhuowen cupped his fists. He deeply agreed with Kuang Li's words. A Dao confirmation divine weapon was a divine weapon that was superior to sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts, but weaker than sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts. The essence of a Dao confirmation divine weapon was actually sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts. The reason why it was much more powerful than sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts was that it contained the Dao rhyme of the heavenly Dao. It was like a Dao confirmation expert's essence might be void heaven 9 steps. However, because of the Dao confirmation, a Dao confirmation expert grasped a more powerful heavenly Dao power than a void heaven 9 steps cultivator. Therefore, a Dao confirmation expert was far more powerful than a void heaven 9 steps cultivator. Master Kuang Li, here are 5 drops of heavenly domain star essence. Zhuowen took out a jade bottle and threw it to Kuang Li. Then he cupped his fists and said, "If Master Kuang Li has nothing else to say, I will take my leave first." After receiving the jade bottle, Kuang Li casually played with it with his right hand and said with a smile, "Shuo, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Why don't you stay at my quicksand family as a guest? In any case, you have obtained the qualification to enter the space-time quicksand river. When the time comes, I will send someone to take you to the space-time quicksand river." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Thank you for your kindness, Master Kuang Li. However, I have some urgent matters to attend to, so I will not be a guest." Kuang Li nodded and didn't urge him to stay. He just said regretfully, "Since Shuo has urgent matters to attend to, then forget it. If you have time next time, you can come to the quicksand family. This old man will definitely not neglect you." Zhuan said a few polite words, then cupped his fists and left the stone house. However, after Zhuan left the stone house, his eyes suddenly became gloomy. This was because he found that the moment Kuang Li handed over the phagocytosis to him, he left a divine sense imprint on him. After all, Kuang Li was a half-step ninth-step void sky expert. This kind of powerhouse was much stronger than a peak eighth-step void sky cultivator. Generally speaking, if such a powerhouse left a divine sense imprint on a sixth-step void sky cultivator, it was basically impossible to detect it. However, Zhuan was different. His divine soul was too powerful, comparable to Kuang Li's. Therefore, the moment Kuang Li planted a divine sense imprint on him, Zhuan immediately felt that something was wrong. It was just that Zhuan didn't say anything. This Kuang Li should only think that he was just an ordinary sixth-step void sky cultivator. However, Zhuan took out a Dao fruit and heavenly domain star essence. It would be strange if this old man didn't target him. After Zhuan left, the smile on Kuang Li's face disappeared completely and was replaced by a cold light in his eyes. A mere sixth-step void sky ant actually has so many good things. It seems that this child's opportunity is not small. However, this opportunity will soon change owners. Kuang Li sneered and muttered to himself. After leaving the Quicksand family, Zhuan met Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan at the door. It was obvious that the two had been waiting for a long time. In addition to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan, Zhuan also found two uninvited guests. These two women were not unfamiliar to Zhuan. Wasn't she Zhu Rui, who had made a deal with him at the Quicksand family? Noticing Zhuan's puzzled gaze, Zhu Rui greeted Zhuan with a smile. Zhuan also greeted her, but his gaze fell on the elegant man next to Zhu Rui. The main reason why Zhuan noticed this man was that this man gave him a beautiful and breathtaking feeling. Even Zhu Rui, who was standing next to this man, felt overshadowed by him. If Zhuan hadn't noticed the Adam's apple on this man's neck, he would have thought that this man was a woman dressed as a man. This Adam's apple proved that this guy was a real man. Brother Zhua, this is my senior brother Yao Xiangjuan. Zhu Rui smiled at Zhuan. Chapter 2297. 7 Profound Pill. Brother, can I have a word with you? Yao Xiangjuan, who was as beautiful as a woman, coughed dryly and smiled at Zhuan. Zhuan nodded. Although he and Yao Xiangjuan had never met, he could see that Yao Xiangjuan had no malice towards him. Zhuan and Yao Xiangjuan walked to the side. After Yao Xiangjuan set up a silencing restriction around them, he said to Zhuan in a deep voice, Brother Zhua, I'm here for your heavenly starry sky essence. Zhuan's pupils shrank, and a murderous intent burst out from his eyes as he stared coldly at Yao Xiangjuan. At the same time, Zhuan was even more puzzled. How did Yao Xiangjuan know that he had the heavenly starry sky essence? Brother Zhua, don't misunderstand. I was born with a pair of eyes that can see through restrictions, so the things that the cultivators of the Quicksand family take out can't escape my eyes, and yours is the same, Yao Xiangjuan explained. Zhuan let out a sigh of relief. It turned out that Yao Xiangjuan had such an ability. He thought that this guy was investigating him. I'm sorry, I've basically given all my heavenly starry sky essence to Master Kuang Li to help me refine tools, so I don't have much left on me. After all, I also need this thing. Zhuan cupped his hands and said. Yao Xiangjuan was not surprised by Zhuan's refusal. He smiled and said, I only need 1 drop. Brother Zhua, don't worry, I won't let you take it out for free. This thing should be enough to exchange for a drop of heavenly starry sky essence. With that, Yao Xiangjuan took out a brocade box and handed it to Zhuan. Zhuan opened the brocade box and found that a pill with 7 golden lines on its surface was lying quietly in the brocade box. A strong medicinal aura burst out like the light of the rising sun, exceptionally dazzling. This is the 7 Profound Pill? Zhuan's heart trembled as he stared fixedly at the pill with 7 golden veins in the brocade box. The 7 Profound Pill was a pill that could allow cultivators to reach the 7th level of the Void Sky realm. It was a pill that cultivators at the 6th level of the Void Sky realm desired the most. However, the value of the 7 Shendan was even higher than the Sky Rank Dan. Even the Heavenly Devil Island didn't have many of them, let alone give them away. This Yao Xiangjuan did not hesitate to take out this 7 profound pill. It could be seen that this guy should also be a rich master. It was just that Juan was surprised. This Yao Xiangjuan was so rich, why didn't his junior sister Zhu Rui even have a single Emperor Dan, and still wanted to exchange with him? In fact, what Juan didn't know was that Yao Xiangjuan's position in the sect was much higher than Zhu Rui's, and he was also deeply favored by his master, so he had a lot of good things on him. However, Zhu Rui's talent could only be considered average, so she was not valued by the sect. Naturally, she was embarrassed. I think it's not too much to exchange the 7 profound pill for a drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence, right? Yao Xiangjuan smiled slightly. Zhuan closed the brocade box again, pondered for a moment, and nodded. It's not too much. This 7 profound pill is very useful to me. Here's a drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence. Take it? Saying so, Zhuan simply took out a drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence and handed it to Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan carefully took out a jade bottle and stored the drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence. Happy cooperation! Yao Xiangjuan showed a relaxed smile. He looked up and down at Zhuan, and his eyes suddenly became dignified and serious. Brother Yao, what's wrong? Zhuan asked in surprise. Yao Xiangjuan quickly said, Brother Zhua, someone has placed a divine sense imprint on you, and it's a very powerful person. If I'm not wrong, it might be Kuang Lu. Zhuan pretended to be surprised and said, How is that possible? Why would Grandmaster Kuang Lu place a divine sense imprint on me? Maybe he has taken a fancy to your heavenly domain starry sky essence or something else. You have to be extra careful. I can see this divine sense imprint, but I'm not qualified to expel it. As Yao Xiangjuan spoke up to hear, a trace of pity appeared in his eyes. Obviously, as far as he was concerned, Zhuan being targeted by Kuang Li probably bode ill rather than well. Many thanks for Brother Yao's reminder. This Zhuo will pay attention. Zhuan cupped his fists and immediately rushed to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan's side. After exchanging some pleasantries, he bid farewell to Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Rui and left. This Zhuan won't live for long. Yao Xiangjuan sighed softly. Zhu Rui's beautiful eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly asked, Senior brother, what do you mean? Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and said, You don't have to worry about this. In short, this Zhuan has been targeted by Kuang Lu, and this boy is a rogue cultivator, so Zhu Rui fell into silence. Yao Xiangjuan was right. This Zhuan didn't have a weak background like they did. Kuang Lu was the most powerful cultivator in the Gulan galaxy. Since this Zhuan had been targeted by such an expert, it was almost certain that he would die. Brother Chao, Miss Chao, let's part ways here. I may have to stay in the Gulan galaxy for a while. After flying for some distance, Zhuan suddenly cupped his fists and said to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. Since he had been targeted by Kuang Lu, it was naturally impossible for him to continue staying with Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. Otherwise, the two of them would be in too much danger. Therefore, now was the best time to part ways. Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan both revealed puzzled expressions. Obviously, Zhuowen's farewell was too abrupt. However, after listening to Zhuowen's explanation, the two of them didn't have much doubt. Brother Zhua, little brother Zhua, this time, it was all thanks to you that we father and daughter were lucky enough to escape the Chao family and survive. Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan respectfully bowed to Zhuan. After saying a few words of farewell, they took out their flying ships and left. Watching Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan gradually disappear from his sight, Zhuan also turned around and left. He needed to find a place to cultivate in seclusion. Moreover, he also needed to prepare early. After all, he didn't know when Kuang Lu would come knocking on his door. Therefore, he needed to prepare early. Zhuowen chose an inconspicuous meteorite in the northern part of the old Orchid Galaxy, near the Death Ice Field. Then he spent 3 days and 3 nights arranging dozens of grand arrays on this meteorite, such as entrapment and killing arrays and offensive arrays. Zhuan was now a Tier 8 God Array Master. Moreover, the Beast Bone Array Disc was much more powerful than ordinary array discs. Therefore, the arrays arranged by Zhuan were definitely Tier 8 arrays with terrifying power. Moreover, dozens of killing arrays were stacked together. If an ordinary Void Sky 8th step cultivator were to enter, they would definitely die. Even a peak Void Sky 8th step cultivator would be seriously injured. Kwang Lu was a half-step Void Sky 9th step cultivator who was even stronger than a peak Void Sky 8th step cultivator. Zhuan estimated that these killing arrays wouldn't be able to seriously injure Kwang Lu. However, they should be able to cause him a lot of trouble. Coupled with some of Zhuan's trump cards, he had a high chance of making Kwang Lu stay. After setting up the killing array, Zhuan then set up an extremely concealed shielding array outside of the dozens of great arrays. In addition, Zhuan also moved a lot of meteorites to cover the surroundings, completely concealing the place where he was cultivating in seclusion. Chapter 2298. Kung Kwangli. After doing all this, Yun entered the center of the array, intending to go into seclusion. He had already obtained the qualification token, so he could enter the spatial quicksand river at any time. However, Yun was not in a hurry. His harvest this time was not small. Not only did he obtain the Sword Heart Stone, he also obtained the 7 Profound Pill from Yao Xiangjuan. He planned to increase his strength first before entering the spatial quicksand river. This way, he would have a greater chance. On the praying mat, Yun flicked his finger and took out a sword-shaped stone. This was the Sword Heart Stone. At the same time, Yun took out the ancient king sword from the spirit ring. As soon as the king sword appeared, it let out a clear sword cry. Then, it swept to Zhuan's side and circled around Zhuan with a slightly wronged expression. It's been hard on you, but I will need you soon. Now, I will increase your level. Zhuan said with a smile. The king's sword seemed to understand Zhuan's words and let out a cheerful sword cry. It obediently floated in front of Zhuan. Zhuan took the Sword Heart Stone and placed it on the king's sword's body. Then, he summoned the black-clothed Zhuan and spat out a mouthful of extreme flame. The terrifying extreme flame wrapped around the Sword Heart Stone and the king's sword. The blazing high temperature was fusing the Sword Heart Stone, causing the Sword Heart Stone's energy to flow into the king's sword through the method of melting. Although the extreme flame was terrifying, the king's sword was also extraordinary. It was able to withstand the burning of the extreme flame. The extreme flame burned for 10 days and 10 nights, and Zhuan also sat cross-legged for 10 days and 10 nights. On the morning of the 11th day, the Sword Heart Stone finally completely fused into the 2 king's swords. A surge of aura suddenly burst out from the king's sword. Then, it sprinkled out like rain. Under this aura, countless cracks appeared on the surrounding meteorites. Zhuan waved his sleeve, and the emperor's sword that had soared into the sky suddenly appeared in his hand. At this moment, Wang Jian's body was like a mirror. The simplicity of his body had faded a lot and was replaced by a sharp aura. It gave people a feeling that he had taken on a new look. Holding the king's sword in his hand, Yun suddenly slashed out. Suddenly, the sword light swept out like raindrops and scattered in all directions. In an instant, Zhuan performed the Tao Destruction Sword Art. He practiced the moves one by one, and his speed became faster and faster. Sword Dragon slashes the sky. When Zhuan practiced the 8th move of the Tao Destruction Sword technique, terrifying sword chi surged and condensed into a sharp long dragon. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swept forward explosively. Everywhere it passed, space exploded and the galaxy shook. At the moment of the 8th move, Zhuan's sword momentum did not change. He actually used the 9th move of Destruction Sword Principle, Big Bang. When the sword was unleashed, the sky broke, the earth shattered and the world collapsed. After the sword was unleashed, the death ice field in front of Zhuan trembled violently. Then, 1/3 of the ice field in the death ice field shattered into countless ice fragments. The death ice field was several times larger than the galaxy. 1/3 of the death ice field was equivalent to a galaxy. The sword was able to shatter 1/3 of the death ice field. It could be seen how terrifying the power of the sword was. Zhuan kept his sword and stood there, his eyes filled with excitement. After adding the Sword Heart Stone, the power of the King's Sword had reached an unprecedented level. It was even stronger than the 2 secondary heaven-breaking divine weapons, Destroyer Meteor and 9 Extinction Divine Pattern Sword. Zhuan knew that the Sword Heart Stone had really given him a great deal. Suddenly, Duan frowned. The monitoring formation that he had set up hundreds of millions of miles away was destroyed. Obviously, someone had broken into the area where he was cultivating in seclusion. Kuang Li. Zhuan noticed that the spiritual consciousness imprint that was still on his body was also moving at this moment. The corners of his mouth revealed a cold smile. He immediately took off the spiritual consciousness imprint and planted it on the praying mat under his feet. After that, he quietly left this place. Kuang Li was not easy to deal with. Zhuan had thought about it a lot in the past 10 days. He didn't want to face Kuang Li so early. After all, if he fought a half-step virtual sky expert like Jiao Deng head-on, he would at most win a Pyrrhic victory. It wouldn't do him any good. After he came out of the space-time quicksand river, he would find the quicksand family again. Of course, Zhuan also knew that even if he didn't find the quicksand family would find him when the time came. Thinking of this, Yuan quietly left this place and rushed towards the space-time quicksand river. Not long after Zhuan left, a figure quietly rushed to the periphery of the death ice field. It was a tall and muscular man. This person was Kuang Li of the quicksand family. At this moment, Kuang Li's gaze fell on the meteorite at the front. This meteorite was surrounded by 7 or 8 small meteorites. It was attached to the edge of the death ice field and looked extremely inconspicuous. It's been 10 days, but this boy still hasn't entered the space-time quicksand river. I'm afraid he's in seclusion here. Although I want to wait until this place enters the space-time quicksand river before dealing with this boy, it's fine now. The sooner I deal with him, the sooner I can be at ease. Kuang Li's eyes flashed. Without hesitation, he immediately rushed into the meteorite. He was a half-step virtual sky Jiao Deng expert. Dealing with a mere virtual sky Jiao Deng ant, he really didn't need to sneak up on him. He could just directly crush him. However, the moment Kuang Li entered the meteorite, he immediately found that something was wrong. There was no one inside the meteor. His gaze fell on a futon in the middle of the meteor. He sensed the spiritual sense imprint he had planted on this futon. Kuang Li's pupils shrank. He knew he had been fooled. Just as he was about to leave, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. A terrifying killing intent swept over like a storm. Bastard! It's actually a killing array. This little bastard has already discovered my spiritual sense imprint. This little bastard actually schemed against me? Kuang Lu roared. Surging divine power surged out like angry dragons, blocking all the killing attacks coming from the surroundings. With Kuang Li's resistance, the killing intent suddenly became several times more intense. Then, the hidden killing formations all erupted. Dozens of killing arrays. How can this little bastard's array Dao level be so high? He actually arranged so many killing arrays in such a short time. Feeling the surging killing intent, Kuang Li's expression finally changed. He didn't put a single killing array in his eyes, even if it was a level 8 array. However, the power of dozens of killing arrays superimposed together was something even an expert like Kuang Li had to consider carefully. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, an extremely terrifying explosion erupted in the death ice field. This explosion was too terrifying. The entire death ice field fell apart, completely turning into ruins. When the explosion was completely over, Kuang Li rushed out with disheveled hair. At this moment, Kuang Li was in an extremely sorry state. His clothes were tattered and his hair was disheveled. He looked like a beggar on the street. Little bastard, I won't let you go. Just you wait. Don't let me find you. Once I find you, I'll make you beg for death. Chapter 2299. Space-Time Stone Pillar. Since the method to enter the space-time quicksand river is in the hands of the quicksand family, and now that Kuang Li has been fooled by me, he must be furious. I must enter the space-time quicksand river before he can react. Yuan muttered to himself as he sat inside the airship in the starry sky, his eyes flashing. Xiao He, go faster. Zhuan said to Xiao He, who was piloting the airship in front of him. Xiao He curled her lips and grumbled. However, she didn't delay and immediately increased the speed of the airship to a new height. The space-time quicksand river wasn't particularly far from the Gulan Celestial River, so it only took Zhuowen 3 hours to reach the periphery of the space-time quicksand river. Zhuowen looked at the river suspended in the vast starry sky in the distance with a glimmer of light in his eyes. The space-time quicksand river was composed of space-time laws, which were much stronger than the surrounding starry sky laws. Therefore, the surrounding starry sky was repelled by the space-time quicksand river. Coupled with the fact that the space-time quicksand river was grayish-white and stretched across the starry sky, it looked like a surging river. There were many cultivators on the periphery of the space-time quicksand river, but compared to the surrounding starry sky, it didn't feel crowded at all. On the contrary, it looked spacious and sparse. There were many buildings around the space-time quicksand river, but Zhuowen could see that these were all temporary buildings. After all, space-time distortions often appeared near the space-time quicksand river. Therefore, the surrounding buildings could easily be destroyed by the space-time distortions. Therefore, no one lived around the space-time quicksand river. Only some adventurers would often come here. However, at the outermost periphery of these temporary buildings, an extremely magnificent white jade temple attracted his attention. At a glance, one could tell that this temple had existed for a very long time. In this place where space-time distortions could happen at any time, this temple had remained intact until now. From this, one could see that this temple was not an ordinary building. Back then, Chao Feng had told him about the method to enter the river of space-time quicksand. He had to enter Quicksand Temple, and Zhuowen knew that the White Jade Temple in front of him was the Quicksand Temple that Chao Feng had mentioned. Before Zhuowen got off the airship, he had already changed his appearance. He knew very well that after being tricked by him, Quang Li would definitely not let him off. Perhaps he had already spread the news of him to everyone in the Quicksand family. Zhuowen's arrival did not attract anyone's attention. Zhuowen headed straight for the White Jade Temple. It had to be said that there were quite a number of cultivators here. However, most of them could only look up at the temple. None of them attempted to approach or enter it. Everyone knew that without Wild Gravel's permission, no one could enter the temple. Even though everyone knew that the temple hid the secret to entering the space-time quicksand river, they still didn't dare to barge in. The Quicksand family was the most powerful force in the old Orchid Star River. No one here dared to risk offending the Quicksand family by entering the temple. Once they barged in, the price they would have to pay would be their life. When Zhuowen walked to the entrance, he saw two familiar faces. The two people were a man and a woman. The woman was beautiful, but the man beside her was even more beautiful than the woman. If the man wasn't wearing men's clothes, he might have been mistaken for a woman, and an extremely beautiful woman at that. Zhuowen was naturally no stranger to these two people. They were Zhu Rei and Yao Xiangjuan, whom he had met once in the Quicksand family. The two also noticed Zhuowen walking over. Zhu Rei just glanced at Zhuowen indifferently. She didn't recognize Zhuowen, and her eyes were extremely calm. Yao Xiangjuan, on the other hand, gave Zhuowen a meaningful look, and the corners of his mouth revealed an unfathomable smile. Zhuowen's eyes were calm. He knew that Yao Xiangjuan should have recognized him. He wasn't surprised by this. Yao Xiangjuan had a pair of strange eyes. Previously, Yao Xiangjuan not only saw through Zhuowen's restriction on the heavenly domain star essence in the jade bottle, but also saw through the Wild Gravel's spiritual sense imprint on him. Now that he could see through his disguise, it was reasonable. "Friend, you also entered the space-time quicksand river? I think you have something urgent to do. Why don't you go in first?" Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhuowen and said with a smile, "Thank you." Zhuowen cupped his fists and stepped forward. He knew very well that Yao Xiangjuan wanted to help him, so he also intended to accept this kindness. Zhuowen knew very well that Wild Gravel should be here soon. At that time, this old man would definitely recognize him. At that time, it would be difficult for him to enter the space-time quicksand river. Therefore, he certainly couldn't stay here any longer. The more he stayed, the more dangerous it would be. The space inside the temple was quite large, but there weren't many people. In the center of the temple stood a stone pillar. This stone pillar was covered with red runes, and the ancient aura it exuded made Zhuowen's heart tremble. The stone pillar reached the top of the temple, supporting the central vein of the entire temple. This is the space-time stone pillar. Zhuan muttered to himself. Chao Feng had told him a lot about the temple before. Generally, cultivators who entered the space-time quicksand river must pass through the space-time stone pillar. It was said that the space-time stone pillar was accidentally obtained by wild gravel of the quicksand family. Moreover, they relied on the space-time stone pillar to build the temple around it. It was also because of this space-time stone pillar that the temple wasn't affected by the space-time quicksand river's spatial distortion and stood until now. Around the space-time stone pillar, there were 3 black-robed old men sitting cross-legged. Zhuowen's arrival immediately attracted the attention of the 3 black-robed old men. The skinny old man sitting in the center glanced at Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Do you have a qualification token?" Zhuowen didn't waste any time and threw the qualification token in his hand to the black-robed old man. These 3 old men weren't simple. They were all powerhouses of the Void Sky 8th step, especially the skinny old man. He was probably at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step at the very least. These 3 were all powerhouses of the Quicksand family. The fact that the Quicksand family could send these 3 powerhouses to guard the space-time stone pillar showed how important it was to the space-time stone pillar. After Zhuan handed over the qualification token, Zhu Rui and Yao Xiangjuan entered the temple. "Senior brother, why did you let this person in first?" Zhu Rui looked at Zhuowen with some displeasure. Yao Xiangjuan smiled and said, "This person is an old friend of ours, and he might be a little troublesome. There's nothing wrong with letting him in first." Zhu Rui was puzzled. She glanced at Zhuowen again and found that he gave her a very unfamiliar feeling. She was sure that she had never seen this person before, so why did Yao Xiangjuan say that this person was an old friend of hers? Just as Yao Xiangjuan was about to explain, his gaze suddenly changed and he turned to look outside the temple. Chapter 2300. Battle. Stop this kid. Don't let him get close to the space-time stone pillar. A thunderous voice came from the periphery of the river of space-time, ringing in the ears of all the cultivators. The skinny old man who had just finished checking and returned the qualification token to Zhuowen with the intention of letting him enter the space-time stone pillar snorted coldly and reached out with his right hand, grabbing at Zhuowen. Surging divine power formed an unprecedentedly large hand and grabbed at Zhuowen. "What's going on?" Zhu Rui was completely dumbfounded. She didn't expect such a sudden turn of events. Although the voice just now was unfamiliar to her, she vaguely guessed that it was most likely the voice of the Drifting Sand family's ancestor, Kuang Li. Think about it, besides Kuang Li, there was no other person in the Drifting Sand family who could order the 3 black-robed old men to attack the space-time stone pillar. Yao Xiangjuan frowned and pulled Zhu Rui out of the divine temple. He sighed as he looked at the young man who was enveloped by the skinny old man's divine power hand. Yao Xiangjuan knew very well that these 3 old men were the Drifting Sand family's hidden, undying old men. They were all very powerful. Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the peak of the 6th step Void Sky stage. Facing these 3 powerhouses was a dead end. Not to mention Zhuowen, even if Yao Xiangjuan went up himself, he would only barely be able to protect himself. He might not even be able to escape. Rumble. The moment the divine power hand completely enveloped Zhuowen, a sharp sword light soared into the sky. Then, the divine power hand collapsed with a loud bang. Terrifying shockwaves tore the surrounding space apart, turning into a storm that swept out. The tall stone pillars around the divine temple were all shattered by the shockwaves. In just an instant, the divine temple collapsed, revealing the space-time stone pillar at the center of the divine temple. The many cultivators who were originally active in the periphery of the river of space-time were completely attracted by the battle in the divine temple. In particular, when they saw an unknown young man facing off against 3 black-robed old men, many of the surrounding cultivators were surprised. Who is this person? He actually provoked 3 temple guardians. Is he courting death? This person's aura is only at the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm. I don't know what he did to provoke the guardians of the divine temple. It seems like he's going to be in trouble. The uproar in the surroundings became more and more intense, especially when someone discovered that Zhuowen's aura was only at the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm. Everyone was even more shocked and felt that this strange youth was courting death. So, it's still too late. I'm afraid that Jun will be killed by the guardian of the divine temple before Kuang Li even arrives. Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and looked at the back of the young man who was facing the 3 temple guardians with a complicated gaze. Although the sound of the wild gravel rolled over, Yao Xiangjuan could see that the wild gravel was still quite a distance away. It would take some time for the wild gravel to arrive. That sentence just now was to remind the temple guardian to stop Zhuan. Zhuan? Senior brother, you said that this person is Zhuan? Zhu Rei also reacted now and looked at the young man's back in surprise. No wonder Yao Xiangjuan said that this person was their old friend, so this person was Zhun. Zhu Rei did not doubt Yao Xiangjuan's judgment. She was very clear about the strangeness of Yao Xiangjuan's eyes. Any disguise would be useless in front of Yao Xiangjuan. Zhu Rei fell silent as she looked at Zhuan's back with a complicated expression. She sighed in her heart. Although she didn't know how Zhuan had offended the wild gravel, she now knew that Zhuan wouldn't be able to escape this calamity. Not to mention the wild gravel, even the 3 temple guardians in front of him could easily kill Zhuan. The skinny old man looked at Zhuan in surprise. He didn't expect that the boy in front of him would be able to block his divine power attack. Although it was just a casual attack, it should have been more than enough to kill an ant of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm. However, the situation now was that the ant he thought was actually able to block his attack. It seems that you do have some skills. Although I do not know what you've done to cause Lord Kuang Li to go to such great lengths, I do know that since you've offended Lord Kuang Li, you will die without a burial ground. The skinny old man smiled slightly. His right hand formed a claw and tore the void. Suddenly, countless claw shadows burst out from the void and enveloped Hyun. Zhuan silently looked at the incoming claw shadow, and with a flick of his finger, a divine sword covered in lightning and fire energy shot out. The thunderfire sword suddenly slashed the void and the lightning and fire energy swept out like a gale. Suddenly, the surrounding claw shadows were torn to pieces by the lightning and fire energy. Little blood disciple, follow me. Let's kill this old fart together. After the thunderfire sword shattered the claw shadows, Xiao He called the blood immortal sword and attacked the skinny old man. The skinny old man's face changed slightly. He didn't expect the young man to have such a divine weapon. It actually broke his attack so easily. Moreover, the skinny old man could faintly feel that the thunderfire sword's power was extremely terrifying. It was probably not weaker than him, so the skinny old man didn't dare to be careless. The 2 of you kill this boy. Don't let him escape. The skinny old man ordered the other 2 old men. Then, he stomped his right foot and rushed toward the thunderfire sword. Boom! Boom! In just an instant, the skinny old man and the thunderfire sword collided. The 2 were evenly matched and it was difficult to tell who would win. However, with the help of the blood immortal sword, the thunderfire sword had the upper hand in the battle with the skinny old man. While the skinny old man and the thunderfire sword were fighting, the other 2 black-robed old men had already arrived in front of Jun. The 2 old men's eyes were slightly contemptuous. They were both experts at the early stage of the Void Sky 8th step. Naturally, they wouldn't be so cautious and serious when dealing with an ant at the peak of the Void Sky 6th step. Zhuan also saw the 2 old men's casual attacks and sneered in his heart. Although the strength of Zhuan's original body was inferior to that of his doppelganger, it was definitely extremely powerful. The 2 old men were only at the early stage of the Void Sky 8th step. How dare they look down on him? They were simply courting death. Thinking of this, Yun held the king's sword in his hand and spread the torch dragon wings behind him. He turned into an afterimage and dodged the 2 old men's attacks. Destruction sword technique. The moment he dodged the attack, Zhuan immediately performed the destruction sword technique. He performed the first sword move, the sword piercing brambles, to the 7th sword move, the sword swimming great void, in one breath. The sword light was like a waterfall. It went against the flow of the destruction sword technique and whistled toward the 2 old men. Chapter 2301. Exterminate. You're not a cultivator of the 6 steps of the void sky? One of the old men couldn't help but look at Hyun. He immediately used all of his strength to block the sword light. This sword light was too powerful. A mere cultivator of the 6 steps of the void sky would definitely not be able to use such a terrifying sword light. I am a cultivator of the 6 steps of the void sky, but I'm not an ordinary cultivator. Zhuan grinned, the emperor's sword in his hand changed again, and he used the 8th sword move, Sword Dragon slashing the heavens. In an instant, the sword light surged out and formed a huge dragon in front of Zhuan that exuded a sharp sword aura. The dragon roared and instantly enveloped the old man's entire body. The old man was already struggling to resist the sharp sword aura, so how could he have any extra strength to resist this terrifying sword dragon? The moment the sword dragon swallowed the old man, a blood-curdling scream rang out. Of course, the scream only lasted for a moment before it disappeared. It was obvious that the old man had completely fallen. You're not a cultivator of the 6 steps of the void sky, you're hiding your cultivation. When the other old man saw his companion being killed in an instant, he was shocked. He stomped his right foot and immediately fled into the distance. His strength was about the same as his companion's. His companion was so easily killed by Zhuan. If he stubbornly resisted, he would be defeated sooner or later. It was better to escape as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Zhuan would not let this old man go so easily. Zhuan's eyes became sharp, and then a golden light flashed out from between his eyebrows. Soul kill. The golden light was very fast, and it immediately rushed into the old man's forehead. The old man's body stiffened, and a painful expression appeared on his face. Of course, this pain only lasted for 3 breaths of time before the old man regained his consciousness. When the old man wanted to continue escaping, it was already too late. 3 breaths of time was enough for Zhuan to catch up to the old man. Sword Dragon slashing the heavens. An indifferent voice slowly sounded from behind the old man. The old man abruptly turned around, and what greeted him was an incomparably huge dragon formed from countless sword cheese. When the second elder completely fell, everyone around was dumbfounded. Some people even rubbed their eyes, thinking that they were hallucinating. So strong. Zhu Rui stood not too far away. Her cherry lips parted slightly as she watched the scene unfold. After a long while, she finally uttered these 2 words. Yao Xiangjuan smiled bitterly and said, "It seems that I misjudged him. This Zhuan is really not simple. I'm afraid his strength is stronger than mine." The skinny old man, who was originally entangled with the Thunderfire sword, also noticed the 2 fallen companions. Immediately, his eyes widened and he was shocked. He wanted to attack and kill the culprit. Unfortunately, the Thunderfire sword was not to be trifled with. It firmly entangled the skinny old man, causing him to only be able to passively resist. "Old man, don't be so anxious. Your master dragon will soon send you to see your 2 fellow sufferers. Don't worry." Xiao Hei's nature was difficult to change. When he saw Zhuan quickly deal with the other 2, he couldn't help but feel complacent and start to boast. The skinny old man was furious when he heard this and said, "Die." As he spoke, the skinny old man suddenly withdrew the illusory sky bridge. Then, his illusory sky bridge actually started to burn, and the skinny old man's aura instantly rose to an extremely terrifying level in a short period of time. Bang! The skinny old man suddenly blasted out a punch, and the Thunderfire sword and Blood Immortal sword were actually blasted back repeatedly. "Motherfucker, this old man is burning the illusory sky bridge. Kid, I'll leave this old man to you. This master dragon is a little tired. I'm going to rest first. I think your strength is sufficient to annihilate this arrogant old man." When Xiao Hei saw the skinny old man burn the illusory sky bridge and increase his strength by several times, he immediately became terrified and consciously retreated behind Zhuan. Zhuan was slightly speechless as he looked at Xiao Hei, who was clearly cowering but was still clamoring endlessly. This fellow's skin is really getting thicker and thicker. He's really incurable. Bang! Not long after Xiao Hei hid behind Zhuan, the skinny old man's attack had already flashed over. The illusory sky bridge above the skinny old man's head was burning, and his expression was ferocious and murderous. Zhuan stood silently and fearlessly facing the skinny old man who was getting closer and closer. Many cultivators in the surroundings watched this scene with rapt attention. Everyone knew that the skinny old man had burned the illusory sky bridge. As everyone knew, although burning the illusory sky bridge could temporarily increase one's strength by several times, the side effects were very great. This was because one's realm would inevitably drop after the event. Generally, only cultivators in a life and death situation would use this method to burn the illusory sky bridge. The skinny old man's strength was already very strong. Now that he had burned the illusory sky bridge, his strength was even more terrifying. The surrounding people wanted to see how this mysterious young man would deal with such a powerful skinny old man. Heaven and earth splitter. Zhuan slowly raised the king's sword and then slowly slashed it in front of him. It was very gentle, as if he was performing a sword dance. With one slash, the sky split open, the earth shattered, and the world collapsed. At this moment, tens of thousands of miles of space with Zhuan as the center completely collapsed. Moreover, this collapse was not an ordinary one. It was a complete collapse. The entire starry sky was crushed into nothingness by this collapse. Even the darkness seemed to have lost all meaning in this collapse. The skinny old man, who was about to approach Zhuan, had a drastic change in expression when the surrounding space collapsed. Afterward, he found that his movements were completely restricted. He wanted to move, but he found that his movements had become very slow. It was as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on him. Zhuan stood in the center of the collapsed space and put away his sword. He silently looked at the skinny old man who was moving slowly and said indifferently, "Farewell." As soon as these words were spoken, countless violent sword intents surged out from the collapsed space. From afar, it looked like a violent storm was raging in the collapsed space, and the storm was formed by sword intents. Countless sword intents pierced through the skinny old man's body. The skinny old man screamed and was finally torn into pieces by the countless sword intents. The illusory sky bridge was also shattered into pieces. As soon as the skinny old man died, countless sword intents surged into Zhuan's king's sword in the center like tadpoles in water. The collapsed space of tens of thousands of miles gradually returned to its original appearance of the starry sky chart. Suddenly, the surroundings fell into silence. Everyone raised their heads and stared at the young man standing in the void with his hands behind his back. No one had expected such an outcome. Just think about it. One side was only a young man at the 6th level of the illusory sky bridge, while the other side had 3 peerless powerhouses at the 8th level of the illusory sky bridge. The disparity between the two sides was extremely large, but the final result made everyone's jaws drop. A young man at the 6th level of the illusory sky bridge had easily slaughtered 3 temple guardians at the 8th level of the illusory sky bridge. This result was absolutely crazy in the eyes of many people. Zhuan slowly turned his head to look at the distant horizon. There, a figure exuding an extremely violent aura was rushing towards them at high speed. "Kuang Li, wait until I, Zhuan, come out of the river of space-time quicksand again. I'll look for you. You'd better wash your neck clean." Chapter 2302. Enter the river of time and space quicksand. The moment Zhuan disappeared into the space-time stone pillar, Wild Gravel had already arrived near the space-time stone pillar. When he saw the mess around him, he was so angry that he trembled. "Little bastard, I won't let you leave this place alive." Kuang Li took a deep breath, his eyes filled with resentment. His loss this time could not be said to be small. The 3 temple guardians were the cornerstones of his quicksand family. Now that they had fallen, the impact on the quicksand family was not small. This time, I'm afraid that Kuang Lu will send a large number of troops to guard this place. If Brother Zhua comes out of the river of space-time quicksand, he will most likely be doomed. In the distance, Yao Xiangjuan glanced at Kuang Li, who had landed near the space-time stone pillar, and muttered softly. Zhu Rui nodded in agreement and said, "Senior brother, are we going in now?" Kuang Li is still angry. "Go in. What are you afraid of? The Drifting Sand family is only the strongest family in the old Orchid Galaxy. Don't tell me they want to dominate the entire 6 Desires heavenly realm." Yao Xiangjuan smiled and walked toward the time and space stone pillar. Zhu Rui followed closely behind. Quang Li was still in a state of rage when he noticed that two more people were approaching the space-time stone pillar. His eyes widened as a powerful aura pressed down on Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Ru. Yao Xiangjuan was already prepared. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out a jade token. The surface of the jade-colored token emitted a jade-colored light, which instantly enveloped Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Ru. The imposing aura fell on the jade-colored light and dissipated. Quang Li's eyes narrowed. He looked at the jade token floating above Yao Xiangjuan's head in astonishment, and his gaze finally changed. "Are you a disciple of Six Desires Palace?" Quang Li asked in a deep voice. The corners of Yao Xiangjuan's mouth curled into a smile. He did not answer Quang Li's question directly. Instead, he continued to walk slowly towards the space-time pillar. "Master Wild Gravel, I just want to try my luck in the temporal quicksand river. I hope you don't mind." Although Yao Xiangjuan's words were polite, he didn't look at Quang Li. He didn't even stop walking. Quang Li's eyes immediately darkened, but when he saw the jade token floating above Yao Xiangjuan's head, he suppressed his anger. It was not the first time he had seen such a jade token. Generally, those who possessed such a jade token had a high status in the Six Desires Palace. The Six Desires Palace was a colossus in the Six Desires heavenly domain. In front of the Six Desires Palace, the Quicksand family was like an ant. Although Quang Li was angry, he did not dare to act recklessly. After Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Ru entered the space-time pillar, Quang Li snorted coldly and left. This time, he had to make a trip back. He needed to send more troops to guard the space-time pillar. He might not dare to touch Yao Xiangjuan, but he had to touch Zhuan. A mere loose cultivator had actually killed the Divine Temple's guardian and even tricked Wild Gravel himself. Wild Gravel would definitely not be able to take this lying down. As long as Zhuan showed any signs of coming out, Quang Li would not let him off. He would definitely capture him and torture him to death. Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. What appeared in front of him was a desert. His divine sense could cover this desert, but when he reached the edge of the desert, there was only an endless void. He could not touch the end. Zhuan unfolded his torch dragon wings and rushed out of the desert. What he came into contact with was still an endless space. There was no color or form. He could only feel the space coming and going, but he could not really control the transformation of this space. There was no direction, no position, and no aura of life. There was only emptiness and nothingness. Yun kept flapping his torch dragon wings and flew tirelessly. He wanted to know what was at the end of this desert. After flying for a few days, Zhuan found that the desert he was standing in had completely disappeared. In front of him was an empty gray space. The ground, the sky, and even his breathing had a gray feeling. Zhuan took a deep breath and stopped. He knew that he should have completely entered the space-time quicksand river. Now, he should be in an area with spatial laws. In this place, space constantly overlapped with each other. With the alternation of spatial laws, space also constantly changed. It looked like many blocks piled up together. If one of the squares represented a kind of space, then when you jumped out of that square, you might enter a different square. That is to say, Zhuan should be shuttling between spaces right now. The desert he had just experienced was one space, and the empty gray space he was experiencing now was another. In this place, as long as you kept moving, you might go from one space to another. You might also be trapped in one space forever, never to come out. The aura of spatial laws here was extremely rich. For cultivators, it was indeed an excellent place to comprehend spatial laws. However, at the same time, it was also the most dangerous place. With overlapping spaces, you wouldn't know where you were. It was like falling into an endless maze. If you couldn't find the right exit, you would never be able to leave this place. Zhuan took out a dim yellow map from his spirit ring. This map was the location of the space-time key he obtained from the Devourer King. Zhuan looked at this map carefully and found that it was divided into 3 areas. They were the spatial law area, the temporal law area, and the space-time law area. The space-time key was hidden somewhere in the space-time law area. In other words, if Zhuan wanted to obtain the space-time key, he had to enter the space-time law area. The foundation of entering the space-time law area was that he had to pass through the spatial and temporal law areas. The best way to pass through these two areas was to have a preliminary understanding of these two laws. Then, he would have to rely on his own understanding to explore and move forward. After keeping the map, Yun started to switch spaces continuously. Time flowed by in this boring space switch. Juan was completely immersed in it. The reason why Juan kept switching between different spaces was because he noticed that every time he switched from one space to another, the spatial laws emitted were the densest. This was beneficial for Juan's comprehension. During these switches, he had experienced all kinds of spaces. Desert space, swamp space, forest space, ocean space, mountain space. There was nothing in the gray space, the empty world, the wind blade world. He had experienced spatial collapse, spatial dislocation, spatial cracks. In this place, he even felt spatial folding and spatial distortion. Chapter 2303. Comprehending space. When Juan went to school in his previous life, he learned about the basics of space. The so-called space essence was a form of material objective existence. However, as Juan continued to touch the surrounding space, he discovered that space was indeed a kind of material. Moreover, the adjacent spaces between spaces were separated by endless distances. If you wanted to use ordinary methods to cross from one space to another, it would be very difficult to do. It was like an ant wanting to cross the ocean. It was simply impossible. However, if you compared the two spaces to the two ends of a piece of paper and folded the paper in half, then the two ends of the paper would be very close. Juan knew that the power that could make this paper fold in half was the law of space. As long as Juan could comprehend the law of space, then he would have the ability to break the barrier between adjacent spaces. He would be able to easily break the space barrier and leave this overlapping space area. However, although Juan knew the truth, what could he do to comprehend the law of space more efficiently? Thinking of this, Juan's gaze fell on the countless overlapping spaces in front of him. His eyes flickered, and an extremely powerful divine sense suddenly blasted out from between his eyebrows. Juan's divine sense was now extremely powerful. The divine sense hand formed from it was even stronger than an 8th-step void sky cultivator. The divine sense hand instantly swept out and grabbed the edge of the space in front of Juan. At the same time, Juan once again created another divine sense hand and grabbed the edge of the space he was in. The moment the two divine sense hands grabbed the edge of the two spaces, Juan roared and gradually drew the two spaces closer. If outsiders were to see this scene, they would definitely think that Juan had gone crazy. Everyone knew that there was a strong barrier between adjacent spaces. Only by mastering the law of space could one break this barrier, allowing cultivators to easily cross spaces. However, Juan had not completely mastered the law of space. He had just entered this place, but he actually tried to use his divine sense to forcibly break the barrier between spaces. This was absolutely a bold approach. If there was even the slightest mistake, perhaps his life would be in danger. Fortunately, Juan's divine sense was too strong, and he was able to withstand the huge impact brought about by breaking through the spatial barrier. If an ordinary cultivator were to do so, he would definitely be courting death. After all, the impact of breaking the spatial barrier was very terrifying. Ordinary cultivators would probably be annihilated into nothingness the moment they broke through the spatial barrier. Of course, Juan did not feel particularly good either. After all, he had to bear the brunt of the spatial barrier every time. If it were not for the fact that he had absorbed the true dragon's blood and reached the level of Devour, he definitely would not have been able to endure it. Moreover, as Juan continued to break through the gaps in space, his grasp of the laws of space became more and more skillful. Naturally, his comprehension of the laws of space also became more and more profound. Juan shuttled through space like a madman. Moreover, the deeper his comprehension of the spatial law, the faster his shuttling speed became. Juan immersed himself in this state of enlightenment. While immersed in this demon-like state of enlightenment, Juan benefited a lot. At the very least, his use of the laws of space had almost reached the point of perfection. Time gradually passed. 1 year, 2 years. Juan had been immersed in this demon-like state of enlightenment for 4 years. It could be said that Zhuowen's consciousness had become a little blurry. He instinctively used his divine sense to grab the barrier between two adjacent spaces. He instinctively broke through the barrier and instinctively entered the next space. Ah! Suddenly, a scream completely awakened Zhuon. At this moment, Yuan happened to arrive at another space. This was an oasis space filled with huge oases. The oases were surrounded by endless deserts. The oases were the only places of life in the endless desert. At this moment, Yuan was standing on an oasis. In front of him stood a topless woman. Zhuon was holding the woman's undergarment and bedding. When Zhuowen's gaze fell on the woman's face, he was suddenly stunned. The woman who appeared in front of him was simply too beautiful. She had a head full of silky black hair that fluttered in the wind. She had slender eyebrows, a pair of eyes that shone like the stars and the bright moon. She had a delicate nose, rosy cheeks, cherry red lips, and a flawless oval face that was pure white and flawless. Her tender snow-white skin was extraordinarily beautiful, and her figure was lithe and elegant. On the other hand, the woman's naked upper body was as white as snow. Her skin was smooth and delicate, causing one to be unable to move their eyes away and forget to leave. "You lecherous prodigal!" The woman covered the pair of soft breasts in front of her with her lily-white hands. Her pretty face was still blushing. She glared at Zhuon with resentment. Zhuon showed a puzzled look. Immediately, he looked at the undergarment and bedding in his hand, and an embarrassed look appeared on his face. Needless to say, Zhuon also knew what he had done. It should be that when he was comprehending the law of space and used his divine sense to break the space barrier, he accidentally tore off the clothes of the beautiful woman in this oasis. Of course, all of this was unintentional by Zhuon. The woman was also caught off guard, so she was caught off guard. Moreover, because Zhuowen's divine sense was too powerful, the undergarment and bedding in his hand were torn to pieces. Obviously, they could not be worn anymore. "Miss, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just comprehending the law of space, so..." Zhuon apologized. This time he really went too far. Seeing Zhuowen's sincere apology, the beautiful woman calmed down. She looked up and down at Zhuon. Her beautiful eyes narrowed, but soon returned to normal. "I don't have any clothes on me. Do you have any clothes in your spirit ring? Let me wear them." The beautiful woman was silent for a moment, and finally bit her lower lip with her pearly white teeth and said to Zhuon. Zhuon was startled, and immediately looked at the woman in front of him with a strange look. He didn't expect that this woman didn't have any spare clothes on her. No wonder she didn't change her clothes immediately after he tore them off. "I do have some clothes on me, but they are all men's clothes. I'm afraid they are not suitable for you, right?" Zhuon hesitated. "It doesn't matter, as long as I can wear them," the beautiful woman said generously. Zhuon nodded. He didn't hesitate to do things. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out a white robe from his spirit ring and threw it to the woman. Immediately, he turned around very consciously. The beautiful woman took the clothes and sighed. Seeing Zhuon consciously turn around, she let go of her jade-like hands covering her important parts and began to quickly put on the clothes. "You turn around. Just now, I saw your divine sense big hand grab here. What do you want to catch?" After changing the clothes, the beautiful woman finally spoke, but her voice was a little cold. Chapter 2304. Space Crystallization. What? You used your divine sense to grab the barrier between adjacent spaces? How is that possible? Even an 8th step void sky cultivator can't do it. The beautiful woman was startled and immediately revealed a look of disbelief. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the 6th step void sky. How could his divine sense giant hand have the power to break the barrier between spaces? Zhuon didn't say anything and just grabbed forward. Suddenly, the beautiful woman, who was still a dozen meters away from Zhuon, appeared in front of Zhuon at some unknown time. The beautiful woman looked at this scene in a daze. She was sure that she and Zhuon didn't move a step, but the distance between them was shortened just like that. Is this the space law? You've mastered the space law? The beautiful woman looked at Zhuon with shining eyes. She obviously didn't expect the latter to have mastered the space law. It should be, at least the barrier between spaces is nothing to me, Zhuan said with a faint smile. The beautiful woman took a deep look at Zhuan and said with shining eyes, Senior brother, can you tell me what you've comprehended? Zhuan scratched his head awkwardly and said with a smile, Miss, I can't explain it. I used my divine sense giant hand to break the barrier between spaces to comprehend the space law, but I don't know what the space law is. The beautiful woman nodded and didn't show any disappointment. The space law was originally an inexplicable thing. Senior brother, you should be Zhuo, right? I've seen you before at the Quicksand family. At that time, you asked Grandmaster Kuangli to help you refine a tool? The beautiful woman suddenly changed the topic. Zhuan glanced at the woman and didn't doubt her words. At that time, he asked the dancer to inform Kuangli in front of everyone in the Quicksand family. For this reason, he had a small conflict with the dancer. As long as it was a cultivator present at that time, basically all the cultivators present knew about him. Miss, if there's nothing else, this Zhuo will take his leave first. Zhuan didn't want to be entangled with the woman in front of him. If he hadn't unintentionally offended her, the two of them wouldn't have had any interaction. Hold on, Brother Zhuo. Are you interested in the space crystal? The beautiful woman suddenly called out to Zhuan. Spatial crystal? Zhuan abruptly turned around and stared at the beautiful woman behind him. He couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. How could he not know about space crystals? These things contained extremely rich space laws, and the most widespread use of space crystals was for cultivators to absorb them. This allowed them to more easily approach the space laws, and it was extremely beneficial for comprehending the space laws. Apart from that, the spatial crystal was the best material for crafting a flying divine artifact. With the addition of spatial proximity, a flying divine artifact could perform spatial jumps, greatly increasing the speed of a flying divine artifact. The so-called space jump was a flying divine artifact that could jump from one end of space to the other in an instant. The distance was extremely large, and a powerful flying divine artifact could even cross half the heaven domain in an instant. However, space crystals were extremely rare and extremely difficult to find in the outside world. These things could only be condensed in places with extremely rich space laws. Many cultivators who wanted to explore the river of space-time quicksand not only wanted to comprehend the space laws, but also wanted to try their luck and obtain treasures such as space crystals. Of course, even in the river of space-time quicksand, the number of space crystals was extremely small. For many years, the number of cultivators who had entered the river of space-time quicksand could be counted on one hand. This showed how rare space crystals were. However, this beautiful woman in front of him said that she had news of space crystals. How could Zhuan not be interested? You have news of space crystals? Zhuan asked excitedly. The beautiful woman said with a cautious look, Yes. When I first entered the river of space-time quicksand, I accidentally fell into a dangerous place. I saw many space crystals there, but it was full of space collapse and space distortion. It was extremely terrifying. For someone like me who hasn't comprehended the slightest space law, going in would be suicide. Zhuan nodded, then looked at the woman in front of him with narrowed eyes and said indifferently, Miss, you and I have only met by chance, and the space crystal is extremely important. Are you really willing to tell me the location of the space crystal? Zhuan couldn't help but doubt the woman in front of him. He didn't think that this woman would be so kind as to share such important information with someone she had only met once. It was really unbelievable. Zhuan had been wandering in the starry sky for so long that he had already understood the ways of the world. He was no longer a newborn calf. He would never believe that a pie would fall from the sky. Because my brother said that you are a man of principle. The beautiful woman suddenly smiled. Your brother? Zhuan asked in surprise. My name is Yao Xiangjuan. My brother is called Yao Xiangjuan. I think you know him? The woman smiled tenderly. Yao Xiangjuan? Zhuan raised his eyebrows. Soon after, he carefully observed the absolute beauty in front of him. He discovered that this woman was indeed quite similar to Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, this woman was much more beautiful than Yao Xiangjuan. Her entire body was filled with a feminine charm. Your brother believes in me? You believe in me so much? Zhuowen said with some amusement. Yao Xiangjuan didn't take it seriously and said, My brother's judgment is always right because what his eyes see is always the truth. Since he said that you are a man of principle, then you are a man of principle. Hearing this, Zhuowen couldn't help but recall that Yao Xiangjuan had once told him about the strangeness of his eyes. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes could see through some hypocrisy and restrictions, but he didn't expect that they could also see through a person's character. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen decided to go with Yao Xiangjuan to have a look. After all, the space crystal was really tempting to him. If what Yao Xiangjuan said was true, then Zhuowen would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Of course, even if Yao Xiangjuan deceived him, Zhuowen wasn't afraid. With his current strength, Yao Xiangjuan couldn't trick him. Of course, Zhuowen was also on guard against this woman because he hadn't been able to detect her specific cultivation from beginning to end. Obviously, this woman had an extremely powerful concealment secret method. Then, please lead the way, Miss Yao. Zhuowen cupped his fists and said, The space Yao Xiangjuan and Zhuowen were in was a desert full of dilapidated fences and dilapidated walls. There was no sign of life in this space, and it was deathly silent. Chapter 2305. A huge harvest. After Yao Xiangjuan led Zhuowen for 2 hours, Yao Xiangjuan stopped, pointed to the void in front of them and said, There are space crystals on the other side of the void. At that time, my head just happened to fall into the void and I saw the scene inside. If I wasn't lucky enough to leave the void in advance, I'm afraid I would have been completely annihilated by the spatial distortion inside. Later on, I tried to enter the other side of the void several times, but I found that I couldn't enter at all. It was as if there was some kind of law obstructing me. I knew that unless I comprehended the law of space, I wouldn't be able to enter the other side of the void. At this point, Yao Xiangjuan turned to look at Zhuowen, her beautiful eyes filled with anticipation. Zhuowen nodded and said, Let me try. After saying that, Zhuowen took a step with his right foot, and with just one step, the space around Zhuowen was compressed and shortened, and Zhuowen instantly disappeared from where he was, as if he had teleported, entering the void in front of him. Zhuowen took over 10 steps forward, directly passing through the spatial collapses behind the void. In the end, he arrived at a crystalline world. When Zhuowen saw this world, his whole body trembled, because there were at least hundreds of space crystals dotted here. Hundreds of space crystals. This was definitely a huge number. Generally speaking, it was extremely rare to have a few. Now, there were hundreds of space crystals here. This absolutely shocked Zhuowen. With so many space crystals, it was enough to simply build a small spaceship. Of course, generally speaking, spaceships built with space crystals wouldn't be so wasteful. They would use space crystals as the core and other materials to support the creation of a real spaceship. Looking at this crystal-clear world, Zhuowen took a step with his right foot and left this place. When Zhuowen returned to Yao Xiangjuan, the latter hurriedly asked, Brother Zhuo, how is it? Are there space crystals inside? Zhuowen nodded and said, There are indeed space crystals inside. According to the original agreement, I will bring you in. Zhuowen stretched out his right hand and looked at Yao Xiangjuan with his clear eyes. Yao Xiangjuan was not a bashful woman. She naturally held Zhuowen's right hand. Then, Zhuowen exerted force and took more than 10 steps in the air. Instantly, the surrounding space was compressed. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the crystal-clear world. So beautiful. Yao Xiangjuan looked at the sparkling and translucent world in front of her and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This sparkling and translucent world was a transparent world. At first glance, it was as if the entire world was made of sparkling diamonds. Zhuowen, you are indeed a man of principle. Thank you. Yao Xiangjuan turned around and looked at Zhuowen with an extremely serious expression as she smiled sweetly. In Yao Xiangjuan's opinion, Zhuowen could have monopolized all the space crystals here since it was his first time here. Then, he could have come out and said that there were no space crystals here. Yao Xiangjuan had nothing to say. However, Zhuowen didn't do that. Instead, after he finished exploring, he immediately came back and brought Yao Xiangjuan into this world again. He presented the space crystals here to her without reservation. Zhuan smiled. Just as Yao Xiangjuan said, Zhuan had his own principles. Since this place was provided by Yao Xiangjuan, Zhuan had no intention of monopolizing it from the beginning. Without the help of Brother Zhua's space law, even if I knew that there were space crystals here, it would be useless. Let's split the space crystals here 50-50. Yao Xiangjuan suddenly turned to look at Zhuowen and said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded, indicating that he had no objection. Immediately, the two of them began to plunder the space crystals around them. After a while, they had collected all the space crystals in the surrounding area. The two of them counted and found that they had collected more than 400 space crystals. If they divided them equally, it would be more than 200 space crystals for each of them. If news of this spread to the outside world, it would definitely cause a great sensation. After all, space crystals were rarely seen, but Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan had obtained more than 200 space crystals each. This was definitely an unimaginable wealth. With these space crystals, I am confident that I can completely comprehend the space law within half a year. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have obtained so many space crystals, Yao Xiangjuan said excitedly. I should be the one thanking you. If you hadn't brought me here, how could I have obtained so many space crystals? I have to go now. See you later, Zhuowen said with a smile. The starry sky energy here is so rich. It's very suitable for cultivation. Don't you want to stay here and cultivate first? Yao Xiangjuan asked in surprise. Zhuowen shook his head. He had his own plans. Although he had obtained a lot of benefits because of Yao Xiangjuan, he was very clear about the purpose of this trip. It was definitely impossible for him to stay with outsiders. The space-time key was very important. If he stayed with Yao Xiangjuan, he might have to enter the depths of the space-time quicksand river with her. This was not the result that Zhuowen wanted. No, I still have a lot of things to do, so I won't stay. By the way, isn't your brother Yao Xiangjuan? Why didn't you enter the space-time quicksand river with your brother? Before leaving, Zhuowen looked at Yao Xiangjuan and could not help but ask in surprise. That Yao Xiangjuan was not an ordinary person. Even this beautiful Yao Xiangjuan in front of him, Zhuowen felt that she was not simple. He knew that the origins of this pair of siblings should be extraordinary. Oh, it's like this. I secretly came here behind my brother's back, so after you go out, don't tell my brother. Yao Xiangjuan stuck out her tongue and said. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly recovered his calmness. He cupped his fists and said to Yao Xiangjuan, Miss Yao, farewell. See you later. After he finished speaking, Zhuowen left this place, leaving Yao Xiangjuan behind to fall into deep thought. This little girl shouldn't be telling the truth. Xiao He stood on Zhuowen's shoulder and said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded. He knew that Yao Xiangjuan's last sentence was a lie without Xiao He saying it. Since Yao Xiangjuan knew him from the beginning and said that she had seen him, Zhuowen, in the quicksand family, and her brother Yao Xiangjuan had also mentioned him, Zhuowen, then the siblings must have met before entering the space-time quicksand river. Now, Yao Xiangjuan said that he had come here behind her brother's back. These words were obviously contradictory. However, regardless of whether Yao Xiangjuan was lying or not, it was no longer important to Zhuowen. After he left the space-time quicksand river this time, he would probably not have any interactions with Yao Xiangjuan and her brother. Before leaving this place, I'll find a space to advance to the 7th step Void Sky Realm. Chapter 2306. Breaking through the Void Sky 7th level, this was a world of volcanoes, and the surroundings were filled with a dense flame aura. The temperature had reached an unprecedented level, and the active volcanoes were constantly spewing out terrifying magma. Zhuowen came to the interior of a dried-up volcano, and after setting up layers of restrictions, he sat cross-legged on a praying mat that he had prepared beforehand. At the same time, he took out a pill from his spirit ring. This pill had 7 golden patterns on its surface, and it was the 7 profound pill that Zhuowen had obtained from Yao Xiangjuan. Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky Realm for some time now. Moreover, his comprehension of the Void Sky Realm had basically reached its peak. The only thing he lacked was an opportunity, and the 7 profound pill would become his opportunity to advance to the 7th step of the void sky realm. Thinking of this, Zhuan suddenly crushed the 7 profound pill in his hand, and then 7 golden dragon-like bars burst out from the 7 profound pill, instantly wrapping around Zhuan's entire body. Time gradually passed, and in the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. On this day, 2 figures rushed out from the world of volcanoes, one in front and one behind, and their speed was extremely fast. Boom! Suddenly, a terrifying attack blasted out from the figure behind, blasting the back of the figure in front. The figure in front crashed to the ground in an extremely sorry state, and spat out a mouthful of blood. Upon closer inspection, the person who fell to the ground in a sorry state was actually a delicate and pretty woman, and the figure who launched the attack from behind was a rather handsome young man. Jia Wendong, you ungrateful bastard, if I hadn't saved you back then, and if I hadn't given you so many resources to cultivate behind my back, you wouldn't have today's achievements. Now, not only do you not care about our old friendship, you actually want to kill me for that Zhu Rui. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? I'm your Dao companion. The delicate woman's face was dark green, and she should have been poisoned by an extremely powerful poison. At this moment, the poison had already invaded her knowledge sea. Even if this man didn't make a move, this woman wouldn't live for long. The handsome man clearly knew that this woman would not live for long, so he simply stopped attacking. Instead, he looked at the woman with a smile and said, "Junior Sister Su, I remember clearly what you did for me in the past. I will never forget it for the rest of my life." Junior Sister Zhu Rui is a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. Although she is just an ordinary disciple, she is still a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. As long as I can win her heart, I will have a chance to enter the 6 Desires Palace. Junior Apprentice Sister Su, I know that Junior Apprentice Sister Zhu Rui is starting to have a good impression of me. As long as I work harder, the good thing between me and her will be done. Therefore, I won't allow her to know that I have a Dao companion. And you can't appear either. This will destroy the relationship between me and Junior Apprentice Sister Zhu Rui. You see, you love me so much. Just grant me this one time and die obediently. I will always remember your kindness to me in my heart. The pretty girl looked at the handsome man in disbelief. She never thought that the man in front of her would be so shameless. Now, she finally realized that she had fallen in love with a beast that was worse than a pig or a dog. I really regret not listening to the elders of my family. I actually fell in love with an ingrate like you. Even if I die, I will curse you to die a horrible death. The pretty girl's beautiful eyes were filled with the will to die. She slowly closed her eyes. She knew that she couldn't escape at this moment, so she simply gave up resisting. The handsome man laughed sinisterly and slowly approached the delicate and pretty woman. Just as he approached the delicate and pretty woman, the volcano beside them suddenly trembled violently. Then, the volcano suddenly exploded, and a terrifying aura flowed out. Rumble! The moment the terrifying aura swept out, a huge purple illusory bridge appeared above the volcano. The first 6 steps of the illusory bridge were already lit up, and the 7th step was flickering like a star. It could be lit up at any time. The handsome man's pupils shrank. How could he not know that someone in the volcano had broken through? Moreover, it was the 7th step of the illusory sky. Moreover, from the aura that flowed out, it could be seen that this person's strength was absolutely terrifying. At least, it was not someone he could contend against. The handsome man glanced at the pretty girl who was about to die from the poison on the ground. His eyes flickered, but in the end he still left this place. The pretty girl's poison had already penetrated deep into her sea of consciousness and even affected her soul. Even a 9th step illusory sky expert couldn't save her. Even if the handsome man didn't do anything, the girl would die without a doubt. The handsome man was very cautious. He knew that killing someone while they were breaking through would definitely violate a taboo, so he left this place immediately. At the bottom of the volcano, Zhuowen's divine sense naturally saw this scene. Although he sympathized with the girl, he was now at the critical moment of his breakthrough, so he definitely couldn't do anything. In addition, the handsome man was extremely cautious. He left this place without saying anything, so the handsome man took advantage of the opportunity to escape. However, from the conversation between the two, Zhuowen also learned a lot of information. The most shocking thing was that Zhu Rui was actually a disciple of the Six Desires Palace. It seemed that after leaving this place, Zhuowen would have to find Zhu Rui again. Of course, if he could meet this scumbag by Zhu Rui's side, Zhuowen wouldn't mind getting rid of this scumbag. Zhuowen took a step forward and stepped onto the sixth step of the illusory sky bridge. Then, his gaze fell on the seventh step, his eyes full of determination. Boom! Zhuowen lifted his foot and smoothly stepped onto the seventh step. At this moment, violent fluctuations appeared in the surrounding space, like a monstrous tsunami in the sea. It was monstrous and terrifying. Zhuowen stood on the seventh step of the illusory sky bridge and silently felt the comfortable feeling of the surrounding starry sky energy pouring into his body. After advancing to the seventh step illusory sky bridge, the strength of Zhuowen's main body had greatly improved. Even if he didn't rely on the avatar, Zhuowen felt that the strength of his main body was comparable to a peak 8th step illusory sky expert. Putting away the illusory sky bridge, Zhuowen took a step and arrived beside the pretty girl on the edge of the volcano. At this moment, the pretty girl's beautiful face was completely covered in pitch-black poisonous gas, looking exceptionally terrifying. Zhuowen's right hand fell on the girl's forehead, and his gaze became extremely solemn. He discovered that the poison was extremely vicious and actually targeted the girl's soul. At this moment, 2/3 of the girl's soul had been contaminated by the poison. Even he couldn't do anything about it. When Zhuowen's right hand fell on the girl's forehead, the pretty girl slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Zhuowen in front of her and didn't feel any surprise. She knew that this strange man in front of her should be the senior who was cultivating inside the volcano. "Senior, can you do me a favor?" The pretty girl trembled and asked. "Help you kill that man?" Zhuowen asked with flickering eyes. The pretty girl shook her head and said, "There's no need to trouble Senior with this matter. Jia Wendong will definitely suffer the wrath of heaven in the future. The heavenly Tao will punish him. My daughter has another request." Zhuowen's brows furrowed and he said with a nod, "You say then." Chapter 2307. Violet Jade. Zhuowen focused his eyes and noticed that the beautiful woman was holding a violet jade in her hand. Of course, violet jades weren't rare to Zhuowen, but Zhuowen noticed 2 lines on the violet jade. Violet energy transformed into violet mist, violet rain beneath violet mist. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice, and it was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through his mind while rumbling and exploding, causing him to be stunned on the spot. Zhuowen was truly too clear about these 2 lines. When he comprehended a trace of 9th level Dao insight in the Sky Clarity Immortal Domain that day, these 2 lines had automatically floated into appearance within his mind, and these 2 lines just happened to contain the truth of the 7th level, 8th level, and 9th level Ultimate Dao insights. But now, Zhuowen had actually seen it in a violet jade that the beautiful woman had taken out, so how could he not be shocked? "Where did you get this violet jade?" Zhuowen held the beautiful woman's jade hand and asked slightly anxiously. The beautiful woman suddenly coughed up a mouthful of black blood, and the aura of death in her eyes grew denser. She withdrew a jade slip from her spirit ring while trembling, and then she passed it to Zhuowen and said, "There's an explanation of everything related to violet jades in here. This violet jade was obtained by the ancestor of my Su clan by accident. But my Su clan has declined more and more, and it was passed down to me in the end. But I've let down the elders of my clan and actually believed that ingrate Jia Wendong, causing me to fall to such an extent in the end." When she spoke up to hear, the beautiful woman's aura became even more dispirited, whereas a trace of pity flashed in Zhuowen's eyes, and he placed his right hand on her shoulder before surging divine energies surged into her body. But this was only treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem. The poison had already entered deep into the young woman's soul, and not to mention Zhuowen, even an expert that ascended 9 times would probably be unable to save this woman. With the influx of divine energy, the beautiful woman's countenance became slightly rosy, yet the aura of death on her body grew denser. "Thank you, Senior. This purple jade has a mysterious origin. Back then, Because of this purple jade, our Sioux clan's grand ancestors' cultivation level rose steadily. Within 100 years, he broke through to the true God realm. Within 1,000 years, he broke through to the virtual sky realm. Within 10,000 years, his cultivation level reached the 8th level of the virtual sky realm. He was unparalleled in the Six Desires heavenly region. He even founded the Sioux clan and became the overlord of the Six Desires heavenly region. Moreover, when the ancestor reached the early stage of the 8th step, his strength was extremely terrifying. Even some late-stage cultivators were no match for the ancestor. It could be said that that era was the Sioux family's most powerful era. However, my Sioux family's old ancestor mysteriously disappeared, leaving only this purple jade to be passed down. However, the strange thing is that every time the Sioux family's patriarch obtained the purple jade, he would mysteriously disappear after his cultivation reached the void sky 8 steps. This has become a mystery of the Sioux family. Due to the disappearance of the Sioux family's patriarch generation after generation, the Sioux family has completely declined. However, this purple jade has never declined and has always remained in my Sioux family until it reached my hands. Now that I'm about to die, I don't want this purple jade to be lost, so I'm giving it to Senior. If Senior thinks it's an ominous item, you can take it back to the Sioux family and let them keep it. At this point, the delicate woman slowly closed her eyes and said, Senior, if you're interested in this purple jade, you can take it. However, Senior, please take my bones back to the Sioux family. At least, I want to return to my roots after I die. As she spoke, the delicate woman's vitality was completely cut off. Then, the woman slowly fell to the ground. Zhuowen looked at the delicate woman who had lost her vitality with a complicated gaze. This was a woman who was infatuated, but she loved the wrong person, which led to such a tragedy in the end. Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the divine flame enveloped the delicate and pretty woman. Then he put her ashes into a jade jar. After doing all this, Yun glanced at the purple jade in his hand. This purple jade still contained the energy of Tao Insight. However, the energy of Tao Insight was extremely weak now. Then he connected it to what the delicate woman said. When the Sioux family's ancestor obtained this purple jade, he should have relied on this purple jade to comprehend the energy of Tao Insight. Through the amplification of Tao Insight, this was why he was stronger than a cultivator at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm at the 8th step. According to Zhuowen's conjecture, the gap between the 8th step and 8th step was quite large. However, the Sioux family's ancestor was able to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step. It was very likely that the Sioux family's ancestors' comprehension of Tao Insight had attained the 8th level. Zhuowen himself had comprehended the 7th level of Tao Insight, so he was relatively clear about the amplification of Tao Insight. The addition of 7th level Tao Insight at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm at the 8th step would at most be comparable to a cultivator at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm, and it was absolutely impossible for him to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step. But 8th level Tao Insight was different. Its amplification of strength was a level higher, and it was sufficient to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm. Of course, what Zhuowen was more concerned about was the mysterious disappearance of the Sioux family's ancestor later on. It wasn't just the Sioux family's ancestor. Every single patriarch of the Sioux family that had inherited this purple jade had mysteriously disappeared after cultivating to a certain height. Zhuowen knew that this ought to be closely related to the purple jade in his possession. More precisely speaking, it ought to be related to the energy of Tao Insight within the purple jade. Moreover, Zhuowen knew that this Tao Insight was the energy possessed by the Sky Tao Insight. Could it be that this purple jade is related to the Sky Tao Insight? When he thought up to here, Zhuowen's gaze became extremely cautious. He faintly seemed to have grasped something, yet it also seemed as if he hadn't grasped anything. Perhaps I should make a trip to the Sioux family if I have the chance. Zhuowen's gaze flickered. He really wanted to know why the Sioux family's ancestor had mysteriously disappeared now, as this was related to the key to whether he should continue comprehending the energy of Tao Insight. In the beginning, Zhuowen didn't feel that there was a problem with the energy of Tao Insight. After all, The energy of Tao insight was truly magical and could increase any strength in the body. But now that he heard about the Su family's ancestor, Yuan began to suspect the strangeness of this energy of Tao insight. In particular, the feeling that the Sky Tao insight gave him was too mysterious, and he couldn't trust the Sky Tao insight. Therefore, in order to confirm the thoughts in his heart, he needed to make a trip to the Su family. Let's leave this place first. Zhuowen stood up and took a step forward with his right foot. It was as if there was no distance in the surrounding space under his feet. Jun shuttled through space after space, strolling leisurely. After taking a few hundred steps, he finally left the spatial law area. An aura of extreme vicissitudes came from the surroundings, as if everything here was passing by. Although the surrounding things were still, it gave people the feeling that they were passing by. Zhuan felt that he was standing in a whirlpool of life that was gradually disappearing. His life seemed to be flowing away, and there was only a kind of panic and fear in his heart. Zhuan calmed his mind and stabilized his thoughts, then he began to carefully size up the surrounding environment. The surroundings were barren. There was no light, no water, no life, no spiritual herbs. There was only an indescribable color. It seemed to be gray and hazy, but also seemed to have a trace of a very strange color. This is the color of time. Zhuan had such a thought for no reason. Chapter 2308. Time Crystal. It seems that I've really entered the time law area. Zhuowen looked at his surroundings and let out a light sigh. In his opinion, the law of time was superior to the law of space. Before the law of time, everyone was equal. After entering this area, Yun could clearly see that his life was flowing away much faster here than in the outside world. Zhuan found a quiet desert and took out a map from his spirit ring. There were detailed markings on the map. His gaze fell on the time law area and discovered that there was a time divine river between the time law area and the space-time law area. The time law in the time divine river was the most terrifying. It was said that cultivators who entered the time divine river would lose their lifespan hundreds of millions of times faster than in the outside world. Even though void sky cultivators had extremely long lifespans, they wouldn't be able to last more than a few days in the time divine river. They would gradually grow old and eventually die of exhaustion. Unless one mastered a certain amount of time law and slowed down the time flow in the time divine river, it was almost impossible to cross the time divine river. Zhuan looked around and discovered that the time divine river wasn't far away. The time law area wasn't big. There was only one space here, unlike the space law area, which had overlapping spaces that were densely packed like a maze. When Zhuan arrived at the time divine river, he discovered that there were 5 figures sitting cross-legged on the banks of the time divine river. Judging from the positions of the 5 figures, they were vaguely divided into 3 factions. 2 white-robed old men sat together in one faction. Another faction had a pair of Tao companions sitting on the other side. The last person was an extremely beautiful man. At this moment, the man was gently waving his folding fan as if he didn't see the hostility in the eyes of the other 4 people. Zhuowen's arrival attracted the attention of the 5 people here. The other 4 people only glanced at Zhuowen indifferently. When they discovered that Yun was only a void sky 7th-step cultivator, they looked away without interest and ignored him. The beautiful man was still waving his folding fan. The moment he saw Zhuowen behind him, a smile appeared on his face. He walked forward and smiled at Zhuowen. "Brother Zhuo, you're really extraordinary. You can actually cross the space law area so quickly. Brother Yao, you flatter me. If we're talking about speed, Brother Yao is much faster than me," Zhuowen said with a smile. The beautiful man in front of him was none other than Yao Xiangjuan, whom Zhuowen had met in the Quicksand family. Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and said, "Brother Zhuo, you're too modest. I'm not much faster than you." "Right, where's Miss Zhu Rui?" Zhuowen suddenly asked. Yao Xiangjuan was startled, and then he smiled and said, "That little girl Zhu Rui's strength isn't enough, so I found a relatively safe space in the space law area and let her cultivate there in peace. After I leave, I'll take her with me." Hearing this, Thun nodded, and then his gaze fell on the 4 people in front of the divine river of time. He said, Why are the five of you sitting on the banks of the divine river of time? Could it be that you're waiting for something? Besides Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation, which Zhuan couldn't see through, he discovered that the other four people's cultivation wasn't bad. Among them, the two white-robed old men were at the late stage of the void sky 8th step, and the couple's strength was slightly weaker. The man was at the late stage of the void sky 8th step, and the woman was at the intermediate stage of the void sky 7th step. Even in the outside world, the strength of these four people could be considered supreme powerhouses. Now, they were actually sitting on the banks of the river. Obviously, they were waiting for something. Yao Xiangjuan smiled and said, "The divine river of time is about to recede, and that means that the time crystal will appear. Brother Zhua, what do you think we're waiting for?" Zhuowen's pupils shrank, and his gaze fell on the divine river of time. No wonder Yao Xiangjuan and the other four people were waiting on the banks of the river. It turned out that the time crystal contained in the river was about to recede. At that time, the time crystal contained in the river would appear. The time crystal was similar to the space crystal, but it was more precious and rarer than the space crystal. The time crystal was also a top-notch refining material. If the time crystal was refined into a divine artifact, the divine artifact would have a slight effect of freezing time. Just think about it, if your divine artifact had the ability to stop time, even if it was only for an instant, it could absolutely help you turn the situation around at a critical moment. Brother Zhua, I know that your strength is not bad, but the other four people are not simple either. After the divine river of time recede, how about you and I join forces to seize the time crystal? Yao Xiangjuan suddenly transmitted his voice to Zhuan. Zhuan was startled. Then he glanced at Yao Xiangjuan. After pondering for a moment, he nodded and said, "Okay, but I want 60% of the time crystal." Yao Xiangjuan was taken aback. Then he smiled and said, "Then it's a deal. With Brother Zhua's strength, even if I only get 40%, it's still a profit." Zhuan looked at Yao Xiangjuan in surprise. This guy seemed to be very confident in him. Could it be that this Yao Xiangjuan really thought that he, Zhuan, was invincible in the world? By the way, Brother Yao, I met your sister Yao Xiangjuan in the space law area. I heard that she snuck out. Is that true? Zhuan stared straight at Yao Xiangjuan and suddenly asked. Yao Xiangjuan was a little surprised. Then he became quite angry and said hatefully, "That little girl really snuck out. I already warned her not to run around, but she still didn't listen." Speaking up to here, Yao Xiangjuan cupped his fists at Zhuan and said, "Brother Zhua, where is your sister now? Can you give me an address?" Zhuan shook his head and said, "I can't give you the specific address. Moreover, the last time I saw your sister was a few months ago. I don't know where she went after that." Yao Xiangjuan looked disappointed and sighed, "It's my fault for not disciplining her well. Brother Zhua, your sister didn't cause you any trouble, did she?" "No, I don't think your sister is a simple person. It's relatively safe in the river of time and space. It won't be too late for Brother Yao to find your sister after you leave the river of time and space," Zhuan said with a smile. "That's the only way," Yao Xiangjuan said helplessly. Suddenly, the ear-piercing sound of water was heard. Immediately, the river of time in front of them began to surge violently and then began to recede. The water level of the river of time on the shore kept falling and began to expose the riverbed below. Although the river water had not completely receded, Zhuan had already seen the sparkling and translucent crystals below the riverbed through the river water. He knew that these should be time crystals. Not only Zhuowen, but Yao Xiangjuan, the two white-robed elders, and the pair of Dao companions also stood up and looked at the time crystal that was about to be exposed with burning gazes. The sound of water was heard again. This time, the water on the shore of the river of time finally receded completely, revealing the riverbed that was several feet wide. "Brother Zhua, snatch it." The moment the riverbed was completely exposed, Yao Xiangjuan sent a message to Zhuowen with his mind. Then his figure shot towards the riverbed at lightning speed. Chapter 2309. Snatch Zhuowen naturally rushed out immediately. The moment he rushed out, Zhuowen released his divine sense and immediately swept up many time crystals. What a powerful divine sense! Yao Xiangjuan's pupils shrank. He naturally noticed that Jun had used his divine sense to sweep away many time crystals. Moreover, this sweep was much more than what they had. The other 4 people also noticed Juon. Although the 4 of them were angry that Tun, a mere void sky 7 steps ant, had swept away so many time crystals, they did not attack him. However, they did not attack Shuowen. There were quite a number of time crystals here. They did not want to delay the opportunity to collect them because of such a small matter. After 10 breaths, the 6 people had plundered all the time crystals in the exposed riverbed at the edge of the divine river of time. As Zhuowen's divine sense was much stronger than the other 5 people's, he alone had obtained 1/3 of the total number of time crystals, far more than the other 5 people. Yao Xiangjuan came to Zhuowen's side and stared at the 2 white-robed elders and the couple in front of him vigilantly. He knew that the fight for the time crystals was far from over. Sure enough, after the other 4 people finished snatching the time crystals, their cold gazes landed on Jun. One of the white-robed elders looked at Jun sinisterly and said, "Little guy, hand over all the time crystals on you and get out of here immediately." "Wei Hua, aren't you too merciful? Just kill this kid. Not only will the time crystals he snatched be ours, but this guy's spirit ring will also be ours." Another elder licked his lips and stared straight at Jun like a hungry wolf staring at its prey. The pair of Dao companions stood silently at the side. Amongst the 6 of them, the combination of the 2 white-robed old men was undoubtedly the strongest. Although the couple also coveted the time crystals that Jun had snatched, they did not want to go against the 2 white-robed elders. Therefore, they only planned to watch the show from the side. "Brother Zhua, these 2 old guys are not easy to deal with. Moreover, these 2 old guys are proficient in combination techniques. We might be at a disadvantage if we go against them. Why don't we retreat? I have 2 escape talismans on me that are enough to help us escape," Yao Xiangjuan suggested. Although Zhuon had killed 3 temple guardians before entering the river of space-time quicksand, and one of them was a late-stage void sky 8 steps expert. However, although the 2 white-robed elders in front of him were also late-stage void sky 8 steps, each of them was stronger than the temple guardian. In addition, the 2 cooperated well and were proficient in combination techniques. He did not think that they had much of a chance of winning against these 2 white-robed elders. "Brother Yao, don't worry, I'll take care of these 2 people. If you feel that it's inappropriate, you can leave first," Zhuowen said coolly. Yao Xiangjuan was stunned. He looked at Zhuowen's back with a complicated expression. He did not know where this young man got his confidence from. He actually dared to take on 2 people by himself. However, Yao Xiangjuan did not leave. Instead, he stood side by side with Zhuowen and said, "Brother Zhua, since we are allies now, I have no intention of abandoning you. Since you want to fight, I'll accompany you." Zhuowen nodded. He had a better impression of Yao Xiangjuan in his heart. Yao Xiangjuan had considered his feelings at all times. This was something that Zhuowen appreciated. "Humph, let's go. They are just 2 little guys who smell like milk. Wei Hua, let's kill them together." The tall white-robed elder snorted coldly. He took the lead and rushed toward Jun. A trident had appeared in his hand at an unknown time. The moment the tall white-robed elder rushed out, the elder named Wei Hua also rushed out and rushed towards Yao Xiangjuan. Zhuowen drew his king's sword and slashed out, engaging in a fierce battle with the tall old man. This tall elder's strength was indeed stronger than the temple guardian from before. However, Zhuowen had already advanced to the void sky 7th step. His strength was much stronger than before. To put it bluntly, Zhuowen did not even need to use phagocytosis to kill this tall elder. However, Zhuowen did not use his killing move. His attention fell on Yao Xiangjuan, who was not far away. This Yao Xiangjuan was quite mysterious. In addition, he had never been able to see through Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation. This made Zhuowen very curious as to whether Yao Xiangjuan was a match for Wei Hua. At the same time, he would be able to understand more about Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, he knew from Jia Wendong that Zhu Rui was a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. Since Yao Xiangjuan was Zhu Rui's senior brother, he was probably also a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. Bang, bang, bang. Yao Xiangjuan instantly clashed with Wei Hua. Yao Xiangjuan's weapon was a divine sword that emitted an azure light. Moreover, Yun found that the divine sword style was a little feminine. However, when he thought of Yao Xiangjuan's face that was even more beautiful than a woman's, it was not strange for him to have a feminine divine weapon. Wei Hua's cultivation was at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step. His strength was not weaker than the tall elder fighting Zhun. However, Yao Xiangjuan dealt with him with ease and did not show any signs of being at a disadvantage. Zhuan looked deeply at Yao Xiangjuan. He thought that this Yao Xiangjuan was indeed not simple. From Yao Xiangjuan's temperament, he could see that Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation time was not much longer than Zhuan's. However, he had this kind of battle strength. He could definitely be considered a monster. Where are you looking? You're actually distracted in battle. You're simply courting death. The tall elder who was fighting Zhuan saw that Zhuan's attention was on Yao Xiangjuan, who was not far away. He immediately felt that he was being looked down upon. He flew into a rage and mercilessly attacked Yun with the trident in his hand. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, countless halberd shadows turned into a monstrous sea, setting off waves that were tens of thousands of feet high. Suddenly, Yun was swept in. His Dao companions, who were standing nearby, saw the terrifying halberd moves released by the tall old man and their expressions changed. The tall elder's move was extremely terrifying. Even if it were the two of them, they might not be able to escape unscathed if they wanted to block this move. The two of them knew that the white-clothed young man was finished. The endless halberd shadows sprinkled down and instantly drowned Zhuan's figure. However, not long after the halberd shadows drowned Zhuan, a terrifying sword light suddenly blasted out from the depths of the halberd shadows. Then, the sword light continued to condense and turned into a huge sword dragon that whistled out. It was Zhuan who had used the 8th move of the Tao of Destruction Sword art, Sky Slashing Sword Dragon. What? The sky? The tall elder looked at this scene with some astonishment. His face quickly turned ugly. He realized that the young man in front of him was not as simple as he seemed on the surface. The young man's strength was far beyond his imagination. Bang! The tall elder suddenly blasted out the trident in his hand and hit the sword dragon. Then, he groaned and retreated dozens of steps before he could barely stabilize himself. Old man, I'm not going to play with you anymore. I'll give you a chance to live. Take this move of mine. Then, you only need to hand over the time crystal and you can leave. Zhuan held the sword in his right hand and looked down at the tall elder. The killing intent in his eyes was so substantial that it radiated out. Suddenly, the surrounding space was filled with killing intent. Chapter 23:10. Count. The tall old man's eyes flickered. He no longer looked down on the white-clothed young man. Instead, he was afraid of him. Of course, while he was fearful, he wasn't fearful to the point of being afraid of the might of this kid's sword strike. I admit that you're very strong. You must have been hiding your cultivation before. However, even so, it's impossible for you to kill me with one strike, the tall old man sneered. Is that so? From the looks of it, you're very confident that you can withstand my sword. All right then, take a good look at this sword that's going to kill you. What exactly is it like? Zhuan's eyes were still indifferent. He slowly raised the king's sword and placed it on his right shoulder. Then he stomped his right foot and disappeared like a ghost. When Zhuan reappeared, he was already 10 meters in front of the old man. Zhuan's sword had already slashed down. Rumble. The moment the sword slashed down, the surrounding space began to collapse and collapse. It was as if space had been completely obliterated at that moment. It was the last move of the Destruction Tao sword art. It was also the strongest move, Genesis Splitter. The power of Genesis Splitter was related to space. This time, Zhuan had completely comprehended the law of space. The power of Genesis Splitter was much stronger than before. The tall old man's face finally changed completely. It was filled with fear, confusion, and regret. The strike was too powerful. The entire space was annihilated. He could not even move his limbs. Moreover, after the space was annihilated, waves of terrifying sword chi dispersed into the annihilated space. Then all of them blasted into his body and tore his body into pieces. The tall old man took one last look at the sword-wielding young man. The regret in his heart erupted like a volcano. Unfortunately, regret was useless. Zhuan looked calmly at the tall old man who was annihilated by the sword qi. After comprehending the spatial law, Zhuan knew that the power of the Destruction Dao Sword Art's final move, heaven-splitting earth-splitting, would increase a lot. In addition, his cultivation level had advanced to the Void Sky 7th level, so killing a late-stage Void Sky 8th level expert would not be a problem. Of course, Zhuan would not be as relaxed as he was now if he had reached the peak of the Void Sky 8 ascensions. Not far away, the couple's faces were pale as they involuntarily retreated dozens of steps. Their eyes were filled with fear as they looked at the white-clothed youth who had taken away the old man's spirit ring. "Senior." When Zhuan arrived in front of the couple, the two hurriedly bowed and greeted him. This person was able to easily kill the tall old man, which meant that this person's strength was above the two of them. Even though Zhuan looked very young, in this world where strength reigned supreme, those who had reached the top would always be first. "Hand over the time crystal. I won't make things difficult for you," Zhuan said calmly. The couple looked at each other and sighed softly. They had no choice but to take out all the time crystals they had just obtained and hand them over to Zhuan. After taking the time crystals, the couple did not stay here for long. They cupped their fists at Zhuan and left. Yao Xiangjuan and Wei Hua, who were originally fighting on the side, naturally saw that the battle had ended. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes were calm. He did not find it strange. After all, Nguyen had already killed a late-stage Void Sky 8th level expert in front of him. It would be strange if that tall old man was Zhuan's opponent. However, when he saw Zhuan deal with the tall old man so easily, Yao Xiangjuan was still a little shocked. He remembered that Zhuan had not killed the temple guardian so easily. Zhuan's strength has increased a little compared to before, Yao Xiangjuan said in his heart. On the other hand, Wei Hua was greatly shocked and had the intention to retreat. Wei Hua roared angrily and suddenly punched out. Then, this punch actually split into thousands of punches in an instant. The punches were like overlapping waves as they fiercely smashed in front of Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes narrowed. He coldly snorted and slashed out with his sword. Instantly, the sword light turned into an incomparably huge blue whale, blocking the countless punches in front of him. At the same time, the instant Yao Xiangjuan blocked the punches, he took out a handful of talismans from his spirit ring and threw them at Wei Hua without holding back. Every single one of these talismans was not ordinary. They all contained extremely terrifying energy. When a handful of talismans were thrown out, continuous explosions erupted from the talismans. Wei Hua was caught off guard and was enveloped by the explosions. When the explosions gradually subsided, Wei Hua's entire body became pitch black. He was in an exceptionally sorry state. He fell to the ground, spat out a mouthful of blood, and did not get up again. Zhuan glanced at Wei Hua. He knew that Wei Hua's injuries were too serious. He was afraid that he would not live for long. Although Void Sky cultivators had the Void Sky Bridge and their vitality was extremely tenacious, the talismans thrown out by Yao Xiangjuan were not ordinary. The power of the explosions went deep into the soul. Wei Hua's main injuries were not external, but the depths of his soul. With Zhuan's powerful divine soul, he naturally could easily detect how serious Wei Hua's injuries were. This was also why he was certain that Wei Hua would die without a doubt. Thinking of this, Zhuan glanced at Yao Xiangjuan again. This person was indeed not simple. Although Yao Xiangjuan's strength might be on par with Wei Hua during the battle, his trump cards were extremely powerful. Just now, when Yao Xiangjuan threw out so many talismans, even if it was Zhuan, he would probably be in a sorry state. Of course, he would not die in such a sorry state like Wei Hua. Brother Zhua, I still underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Yao Xiangjuan put away Wei Hua's spirit ring and came in front of Zhuan. His eyes were filled with fear and surprise. Zhuan smiled slightly and said, "It was just luck." Yao Xiangjuan smiled embarrassedly. He naturally did not think that this was really Zhuan's luck. However, Since Zhuan did not want to talk about this topic, Yao Xiangjuan would not pursue it. Brother Yao, take this time crystal. I said that we would split it 40 to 60. Zhuan casually threw a spirit ring to Yao Xiangjuan. The latter caught the spirit ring with slight surprise. He immediately checked it and said, Brother Zhua, you really want to split it with me? These were all obtained by you. I am a man of my words. How could I take advantage of you in this matter? Zhuowen said indifferently. Yao Xiangjuan looked deeply at Zhuowen and smiled. He also took out the time crystal from Wei Hua's spirit ring and threw it to Zhu. He said, This is 60% of the time crystal in Wei Hua's spirit ring. Brother Zhua, please count it. Zhuowen took the time crystal and nodded. He directly put it into the spirit ring without any intention of counting it. Chapter 23:11. Snatch again, Brother Zhua, what are your plans? Are you going to leave this place or stay here to comprehend the rules of time? Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhua and asked. I want to cross the divine river of time, Zhua said in a deep voice. Yao Xiangjuan was shocked, then shook his head and said with a smile, Brother Zhua, the divine river of time is too terrifying. Even if you have comprehended the rules of time, the flow of time in the divine river of time is still faster than the outside world. Moreover, we don't know how wide this divine river of time is, so Zhua smiled and did not answer. Instead, he took out a praying mat and sat cross-legged on the shore. He began to comprehend the rules of time here. This was originally an area of time rules, and the power of time rules was emitted everywhere. Moreover, Zhua could also feel that the flow of time around him was faster. Clearly, it was because of the rules of time. If the rules of time on the shore were so terrifying, then there was no need to mention the divine river of time. Zhua did not know anything about the rules of time, so he naturally would not rashly enter the divine river of time. Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhua, who was sitting not far away, and smiled bitterly. He knew that Zhua had already given him the answer. Yao Xiangjuan also found a secluded place, took out a praying mat, and sat down cross-legged. His gaze fell on the divine river of time in front of him, and he said in a daze, Brother Zhua, could it be that you want to cross the divine river of time for the space-time roulette? Zhua's eyelids twitched, but he did not open his eyes. Instead, he fell into silence. Yao Xiangjuan did not mind, but continued to talk to himself. I once heard my master say that the most precious thing in the space-time river of quicksand is not the space crystal or the time crystal, but something called the space-time roulette. The speed of the space-time roulette is the fastest in the world. No one can compare to it. Even the top-flight divine tool in the heavenly domain cannot compare to the space-time roulette. Yao Xiangjuan said. Zhua's heart stirred, and he was filled with curiosity about the space-time roulette. From Yao Xiangjuan's tone, Zhuan could tell that the space-time roulette was a top-notch flying artifact. It could also be said that it was the fastest treasure in all of the heaven domains. However, Zhuan was somewhat ignorant. He had not come to the river of space-time quicksand for the space-time roulette. Instead, he had come for the space-time key. As for whether the space-time roulette and the space-time key had any definite connection, Zhuan was not very sure. If he could cross the divine river of time this time, Zhuan would definitely look for the space-time key first. Then, if he had the chance, he might look for the so-called space-time roulette. Time ticked by. Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan sat on the shore, trying to comprehend the laws of time. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. During this time, many cultivators came out of the spatial law zone and came to the shore of the divine river of time. As Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan's auras were not weak, most of the cultivators did not deliberately offend Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan. Of course, there were some who offended them, but they were basically dealt with by Xiaohe, who was guarding Zhuowen. For a time, the area around Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan became a forbidden area for other cultivators. Most of the cultivators who entered the temporal law zone were there to comprehend the laws of time. Therefore, many cultivators followed Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan's example and sat in this space, silently comprehending the laws of time, hoping to gain something. Among them, there were also some impatient cultivators who knew that there were good things like time crystals in the divine river of time. They could not suppress the greed in their hearts and entered the divine river of time. In the end, the moment these cultivators entered the divine river of time, their hair turned white, their skin became dry like tree bark, and their vitality was constantly washed away by the waves of the divine river of time. In the end, they died of old age in the divine river of time. Such an outcome was like a basin of cold water that was poured over most of the cultivators' heads. These cultivators no longer had any wishful thinking in their hearts. Instead, they obediently comprehended the laws of time first. The divine river of time would ebb and flow once every 10 years. It had been 10 years since the last ebb, and the second ebb was about to begin. At this moment, Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. His eyes flickered with a bright light. In the past 10 years, he had been comprehending the laws of time all the time. He was not stingy in using up all the time crystals he had obtained. He also had a certain understanding and comprehension of the laws of time. Not enough. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. His gaze fell on the divine river of time in front of him again. He knew that the divine river of time was about to ebb again. Every time it ebbed, many time crystals would appear on the riverbed on the shore. If he wanted to quickly comprehend the laws of time, he could only rely on time crystals. Although Zhuowen had gained a lot in the past 10 years, he knew that his comprehension of the laws of time was still superficial. If he wanted to have a deeper understanding, he would need enough time crystals and sufficient time. Yao Xiangjuan also opened his eyes. He glanced at Zhuowen and saw the latter nodding and smiling slightly. He also knew what Zhuowen meant. The waves on the shore of the divine river of time suddenly surged. Then, the water level on the shore was falling, revealing a part of the sparkling and translucent time crystals. As the water level continued to fall, more and more time crystals were exposed. Whoosh, whoosh. Before the water level had completely receded, many cultivators on the shore could not hold back and rushed out to snatch the exposed time crystals. Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan were no exception. Zhuowen's divine sense gushed out and turned into a big hand. In an instant, many time crystals were swept away. His speed was far faster than other cultivators. When the water level completely fell, the riverbed finally appeared in front of everyone. Everyone went crazy. Some cultivators even started to fight in order to snatch the time crystals. The scene became extremely chaotic. Zhuowen did not care about those cultivators who were fighting at all. Instead, he focused on grabbing the time crystals and collecting as many time crystals as he could. After a while, the time crystals on the exposed riverbed were basically all plundered. Apart from the bare riverbed, there were no more time crystals. As for Zhuowen, he had snatched more than half of the time crystals. Although Yao Xiangjuan could not compare to Zhuowen in terms of the number of time crystals he had snatched, it was still quite a number. At the very least, Yao Xiangjuan was quite satisfied. The rest of the time crystals were basically divided among other cultivators. However, the general situation was that there were too many monks and too little gruel. There was also a large number of cultivators who did not get a single time crystal at all. Chapter 23:12. Space-time roulette. Zhuowen could not be bothered with those cultivators who were still arguing endlessly. He planned to find a secluded place and go into seclusion to comprehend the time rule again. He had a feeling that with so many time crystals, he would definitely gain quite a bit in terms of time rule. However, just as Zhuowen left the riverbed and arrived at the shore, he was intercepted by a group of people. This group of people had a total of over 20 people, and the person in the lead was a man with an arrogant expression. The aura on this man's body was vast. He was actually also a Void Sky 7th-step powerhouse. "What's the matter?" Zhuowen said indifferently. "This brother, I saw that you acted extraordinarily just now and took away more than half of the time crystals. Brother, don't you think that you're too greedy? You alone took more than half of the time crystals." The arrogant man said indifferently. Zhuowen's gaze was indifferent as he glanced at the arrogant man and the 20 over people behind him, sneering coldly in his heart. Without needing to think, he also knew why these 20 over people were here. However, Zhuowen did not want to get entangled with these people and said coldly, "If you don't want to die, scram. These time crystals are ownerless to begin with. Whoever gets them will get them." It's my ability that I can get more than half of them. If you have the ability, go and snatch so many time crystals too. The arrogant man's face immediately darkened, and the 20 over people behind him also revealed looks of anger. You're still in the right to take so many time crystals by yourself? Everyone discovered the time crystals. Since you took so many, you should take them out and share them equally with everyone. That's right. What right do you have to take so many time crystals? The 20 over people behind the arrogant man immediately clamored and blocked in front of Zhuan, not having the slightest intention of letting him pass. The arrogant man's mouth revealed a mocking smile, and he said indifferently, "Brother, you see that everyone's voice is very loud. I think you should comply with the public opinion and take out the time crystals. Of course, you only need to take out 2/3 of the time crystals on you. Then you can keep the rest for yourself. How about it?" Zhuan couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with this arrogant man. He opened his hand and slammed it towards the arrogant man's face. The haughty man's eyes darkened. His divine power suddenly erupted, wanting to block Zhuan's palm. But soon, the arrogant man's expression changed. He found that he couldn't move. Spatial rule power? You've completely comprehended the spatial laws? How can he be so strong? The arrogant man's expression changed greatly. Unfortunately, just as he finished speaking, Zhuan's palm ruthlessly slapped his face. "Pucci!" The arrogant man spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with broken teeth. Then he rolled a few times in the air before crashing to the ground in a sorry state. "Oh, you crippled me!" The arrogant man raised his head with difficulty and glared at Zhuan with resentment. Then he fell to the ground and completely lost consciousness. The remaining 20 or so people were stunned on the spot. Their bodies trembled as they looked at the white-clothed young man in front of them. Then, they dispersed in an uproar. The arrogant man was the strongest among them, but he was knocked to the ground by the white-clothed young man with a single slap. They weren't fools. They knew that the white-clothed young man in front of them was far stronger than them. Zhuan looked at this group of people silently. He didn't chase after them. Instead, he left this place. Although one needed to comprehend the spatial laws to enter the spatial laws area, generally speaking, one only needed to comprehend a part of the spatial laws to leave the spatial laws area. Therefore, most of the cultivators who entered the spatial laws area had only comprehended a part of the spatial laws. However, Zhuan was different. He had completely comprehended the spatial laws. He was much stronger than the arrogant man and the others. In addition, the arrogant man was only 7 steps in the void sky. Zhuan used the spatial laws to easily imprison the arrogant man on the spot, making him unable to move. The battle on Zhuan's side naturally attracted the attention of many cultivators around. Especially after seeing Zhuan cripple the arrogant man with 7 steps in the void sky in one move, the cultivators who originally wanted to play tricks all gave up. This was a ruthless person. They didn't want to end up like that arrogant man. Yao Xiangjuan followed behind Zhuan. He wasn't surprised that Zhuan made a move. After spending some time together, Yao Xiangjuan had more or less figured out Zhuan's character. Zhuan was a very principled person. If others didn't offend him, he wouldn't offend them. If others offended him, he would definitely bite back. This kind of person couldn't be offended the most. Once offended, if this person couldn't be eliminated immediately, it would become an endless disaster in the future. In a valley far away from the divine river of time, Yun found a cave in the surroundings. Seeing Yao Xiangjuan follow him in, Yun was speechless. "Brother Yao, there are many caves in this valley. Why do you have to squeeze into a cave with me?" Yao Xiangjuan smiled faintly. His smile had a rare trace of charm. When Zhuan saw this smile, he actually became absent-minded for a moment. Although Yao Xiangjuan was a man, he had a face that was more beautiful than a woman's. If Yao Xiangjuan wore women's clothes, no one would think that he was a man dressed as a woman. After regaining his senses, Zhuan deliberately looked at the Adam's apple on Yao Xiangjuan's neck. After confirming that Yao Xiangjuan was indeed a man, he was relieved. Yao Xiangjuan also noticed Zhuan's small movements. He frowned slightly, but didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled and said, "Brother Zhuan, don't worry. I won't disturb Brother Zhua. Moreover, the two of us can take care of each other while cultivating. Zhuowen shrugged and didn't say anything. He took out a praying mat, sat down cross-legged, and continued to comprehend the time law. Yao Xiangjuan raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. Instead, he sat cross-legged not far away, silently cultivating and comprehending the time law. 5 years quietly passed. Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged on the praying mat, suddenly stood up. Then he threw out a punch. Instantly, the rock wall that his fist passed through became riddled with holes as if it had been eroded by the wind. Zhuowen knew that this was the mark of the passage of time. Only after hundreds or thousands of years of weathering would a rock become riddled with holes. Yao Xiangjuan also sensed the commotion on this side. He looked at the stone wall that was riddled with holes next to Zhuowen and revealed a shocked expression. "Brother Zhuo, you have completely comprehended the laws of time?" Zhuowen shook his head and said, "The temporal laws aren't that easy to comprehend. However, I've gained quite a bit of a grasp of the temporal laws. At the very least, I'm much more confident in traversing the river of time now." Yao Xiangjuan had a complicated look in his eyes. There was no doubt that Zhuowen's comprehension ability was stronger than his. Over the past 15 years, Yao Xiangjuan had been diligently comprehending the time law. Although he had made some progress in the time law, he couldn't compare with Zhuowen. At least, Yao Xiangjuan was far from reaching the point where he could cross the time river alone. Thinking of this, Yao Xiangjuan's eyes flickered. He gritted his teeth and said, "Brother Zhuo, can you help me cross the time river?" Zhuowen looked at Yao Xiangjuan in surprise. Just when he was about to refuse, Yao Xiangjuan said again, "If you can help me cross the time river, I can provide you with clues about the space-time roulette." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and took a deep look at Yao Xiangjuan. It seemed that Yao Xiangjuan was hiding a lot of things from him. At least, he didn't think that Yao Xiangjuan was interested in the space-time roulette. Chapter 23:13. Centering the Divine River of Time. "Brother Yao, since you've told me all the clues about the space-time roulette, you might not be able to beat me when you enter the Divine River of Time," Zhuowen said with a smile. Yao Xiangjuan didn't seem to mind and said, "Brother Zhuo, you probably don't know that the space-time roulette is a flying treasure. As far as I know, there are no other flying divine weapons that can compare to the space-time roulette, but..." At this point, Yao Xiangjuan fell silent. However, Zhuowen had other thoughts in his mind. If the space-time roulette was really so magical, the true experts of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace should also enter the river of time and space to search for treasures. However, as far as Zhuowen was concerned, the strongest experts who had entered the river of time and space were the two white-robed elders. Their cultivations were only at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step. He hadn't even seen an expert at the peak of the Void Sky 8th step. Obviously, this so-called space-time roulette might have some flaws, or it might just be a rumor. "Brother Yao, feel free to say what you want to say," Zhuowen said with a smile. "It's actually like this. When the space-time roulette first appeared in the space-time quicksand river, it caused several Void Sky 9th Ascension experts to fight over it. Even the Palace Master of Six Desires Palace took action. In the end, the space-time roulette was shattered by these experts." Yao Xiangjuan said with some embarrassment. Zhuowen's gaze suddenly became extremely strange. He didn't deny that the space-time roulette was a flying treasure, but a flying treasure that was shattered into pieces was equivalent to having no value at all. "Brother Zhuo, you may not know that the two core components of the space-time roulette are actually the space-time cores. Each space-time core contains extremely rich space-time power. If the space-time core is placed on a flying divine weapon, its speed may not surpass that of the space-time roulette, but it's at least much faster than most flying divine weapons." Yao Xiangjuan took a deep breath and said with a slightly blazing gaze. Zhuowen took a deep look at Yao Xiangjuan. If what Yao Xiangjuan said was true, then the hollow space would be very useful. Although Zhuowen had several flying divine artifacts, they weren't very fast. They weren't even as fast as Zhuowen's speed if he went all out. Therefore, Zhuowen still wanted an extremely fast flying artifact from the bottom of his heart, and the space-time roulette obviously met the requirements in Zhuowen's heart. However, since the space-time roulette had already been shattered, he could only settle for the next best thing, which was to obtain the space-time hollow space. After a moment of silence, Zhuan said, "Brother Yao, if what you said is true, I can bring you across the divine river of time. However, I cannot guarantee your safety." However, Yao Xiangjuan smiled and said, "It's fine. As long as Brother Zhuo can bring me across the divine river of time, it's fine. Let's go then." Zhuan nodded and left the cave first. However, not long after Zhuan left the cave, a black shadow suddenly rushed out from another cave in the valley and landed beside Zhuan. This black shadow was a rather handsome young man. His face was very similar to Zhuowen's. He was dressed in a black robe and was Zhuowen's clone. Zhuan had stayed in the time rule area for 15 years. During these 15 years, Zhuan had basically released the black-robed Zhuowen and let him absorb the calamity crystals and cultivate on his own. Although the black-robed Zhuowen's speed of passing through the wind disasters was much slower than before, he had still passed through 5 wind disasters in the past 15 years. Including the first wind disaster, Zhuan had passed through a total of 6 wind disasters. Just as Zhuan had studied before, except for the first wind disaster that was more terrifying, the next 5 wind disasters were not as powerful as the first one. Therefore, the black-robed Zhuowen had passed through the wind disasters quite easily. Of course, Zhuan also knew that when he passed through the 8th wind disaster and welcomed the 9th wind disaster, that would be the real challenge. The 9th wind disaster was the second hurdle, and its power was probably even more terrifying than the first wind disaster. For this reason, Zhuan had made a lot of preparations in advance. If he was not very confident, he would not take the risk to try the 9th wind disaster. Yao Xiangjuan, who was following behind, stole a glance at the black-robed Zhuowen, and his eyes revealed a hint of fear. As early as when he was with Zhuan, he knew that Zhuan had a clone. What surprised him even more was that this clone of Zhuowen gave him a much stronger sense of crisis than the main body. Yao Xiangjuan knew what this meant. Obviously, Zhuowen's clone was stronger than the main body, and this clone was undoubtedly Zhuowen's final trump card. Thinking of this, Yao Xiangjuan became even more fearful of Zhuan. He felt that this white-robed young man in front of him was really unfathomable. When he came to the shore of the divine river of time again, Zhuan found that the number of people on the shore of the divine river of time had doubled. Cultivators could be seen sitting cross-legged on the shore, comprehending the laws of time. Of course, there were also a small number of cultivators who were arguing and fighting not far away. Divine power surged and boiled, and it was quite a spectacular sight. Zhuowen's arrival immediately attracted the attention of many cultivators on the shore. Many of them revealed a hint of fear in their eyes. Obviously, they recognized Zhuowen. Back then, the matter of Zhuowen crippling the arrogant man with a single slap had spread like wildfire after Zhuowen had left. Wherever Zhuowen passed, the surrounding cultivators would involuntarily make way for him. There were also some new cultivators who didn't know Zhuowen. When they saw the reverence in the other cultivators' eyes, their eyes revealed surprise and doubt. Of course, there would usually be people who would remind these newcomers of the identity of this seemingly harmless young man who was walking over. The new cultivators also revealed looks of fear. Zhuowen didn't care about the reverent gazes of the surrounding cultivators at all. He walked straight to the shore and stopped. What is this person trying to do? Could it be that he wants to enter the divine river of time? How is that possible? It's not like you don't know how terrifying the divine river of time is. This person wouldn't be so stupid as to go in and die. Discussions rang out one after another, all of them discussing Zhuowen's current actions. Zhuowen's next action completely shocked everyone around. Zhuowen took a step forward and jumped into the divine river of time. Yao Xiangjuan, who was following behind Zhuowen, didn't hesitate and jumped into the divine river of time with Zhuowen. The moment Zhuowen entered the divine river of time, Zhuowen could clearly feel that the flow of time was speeding up. Moreover, it was rapidly accelerating, and his vitality was rapidly depleting as time passed. Chapter 23:14. Crossing. Zhuowen frowned slightly and raised his hands. The rule of time gushed out from his hands. Suddenly, the influence of the divine river of time on Zhuowen became much smaller, and Zhuowen's withered hands gradually returned to their original state. On the other hand, Yao Xiangjuan was desperately resisting the erosion of the rule of time the moment he entered the divine river of time. At this moment, he was staggering, his face was pale, and the tips of his hair had turned white. It was obvious that his level up was passing very quickly. Zhuan grabbed Yao Xiangjuan's right hand with one hand and immediately lifted Yao Xiangjuan up by the waist with the other hand. Yao Xiangjuan was almost entangled by the divine river of time and could not move at all. Zhuan could only rely on this method to lift Yao Xiangjuan up. The moment Yao Xiangjuan was lifted up by Zhuan, he could not help but exclaim. Then he began to struggle, as if he was not used to the feeling of being hugged by others. "Brother Yao, if you don't want to die, you'd better not move," Zhuan said in a deep voice. Yao Xiangjuan's body stiffened. In the end, he did not struggle anymore. Instead, he lay meekly on Zhuan's chest, but his cheeks were as red as an apple. Zhuan's gaze was a little strange. It was the first time he had hugged a man, and a man as beautiful as a woman. Of course, this was also a helpless action. After all, the rule of time in the divine river of time was too strong, and Zhuan had not completely comprehended the rule of time. If the two of them were not close, Zhuan would not be able to protect Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan had obviously guessed Zhuan's thoughts. Although his body was slightly unnatural, he did not say anything. However, what surprised Zhuan was that Yao Xiangjuan's body was so soft that it was as if there were no bones. He was even softer than an ordinary woman. Zhuan, who was hugging Yao Xiangjuan, did not feel that he was hugging a man at all. Instead, it felt more like a woman. "Brother Zhuo, let's go," Yao Xiangjuan gently reminded. Zhuan recovered and nodded. He took a step forward with his right foot and the space under his feet was immediately compressed. He took a step forward and instantly turned into a black dot in the distance. Countless cultivators on the banks of the divine river of time were stunned as they watched the two of them leave in an instant. These cultivators had personally experienced just how terrifying the divine river of time was. In the past, many cultivators had attempted to cross the divine river of time. However, they either died of old age upon entering the divine river of time or were drowned by the waves of time. Anyway, no one had walked more than 100 miles in the divine river of time. However, Zhuan's speed was too terrifying. He disappeared in front of their eyes in an instant. It was more than 100 miles. It was more than 1,000 miles, or even 10,000 miles. After taking 10 steps in a row, powerful spatial rules lingered around Zhuan's body. Zhuan could no longer see the shore of the divine river of time. All around him were gray waves of time. Zhuan's eyes became extremely solemn. He had thoroughly comprehended the spatial rules. The distance he covered with 10 steps was at least 10 million miles. However, he didn't walk out of the divine river of time. Instead, he came to the endless waves of time. Zhuan knew that the span of the divine river of time was even longer than he had imagined. Moreover, the spatial rules here seemed to be substantial. They densely covered the place and turned into various terrifying attacks. They swept over and bombarded Zhuan's body. The attacks formed by the spatial rules were exceptionally terrifying. They were enough to kill any cultivator below the void sky 9th step. Even if it was Zhuan, if he had not grasped the time law to the point of great mastery, he would definitely die here. Of course, although Zhuan blocked the attacks of the spatial rules around him, he obviously didn't have it easy. The surface of Zhuan's skin and hair began to age. His eyes began to turn turbid, and his back became hunched. At this moment, Zhuan's youthful appearance turned into an old man of about 50 years old. This was the influence of the spatial rules. Zhuan knew that if he didn't walk out of the divine river of time as soon as possible, he would continue to age until he died. Yao Xiangjuan curled up in Zhuan's arms. He obviously noticed Zhuan's strange state. His gaze changed drastically, and he said, "Brother Zhuan, are you okay?" "Don't talk. I'm fine," Zhuan said in a low voice. He took another step forward. The spatial rules and temporal rules were used to the extreme. Yao Xiangjuan naturally didn't dare to say anything. However, he was rather worried about Zhuan. Seeing that Zhuan was beginning to age, he felt rather guilty. If Zhuan didn't want to bring him along, he knew that with Zhuan's strength, He should be able to cross the divine river of time very quickly. Zhuan took another 10 steps. His hair was completely white, and his appearance was that of a 70-year-old old man. However, he still couldn't cross the divine river of time. He was still surrounded by gray waves of time. Brother Zhua, put me down. I should be the one dragging you down this time. I didn't expect the divine river of time to be so terrifying. I miscalculated. Yao Xiangjuan sighed softly. Zhuan didn't care. Instead, he kept moving forward like a demon. Although his body was constantly aging, his eyes became brighter and brighter, like the most resplendent stars in the night sky. Being in the divine river of time and experiencing the terror of the temporal rules in the divine river of time, Zhuan had a deeper understanding of the temporal rules. Outside the divine river of time, Zhuan had a deep understanding of the temporal rules with the help of time crystals and had reached the level of great success. However, no matter how rich the temporal rules in the outside world were, they couldn't be compared to the temporal rules in the divine river of time. More than 90% of the temporal rules in the temporal rule area were gathered in the divine river of time. The divine river of time was the best place to comprehend the temporal rules. However, the temporal rules in the divine river of time were too powerful. Therefore, ordinary cultivators didn't dare to comprehend the temporal rules in the divine river of time. It was too late for them to escape. Zhuowen already had a certain level of understanding of the time law. Now that he was deep in the divine river of time, he had personally experienced the terrifying power of the time law in the divine river of time. Hence, he naturally understood some of the minor details of the time law. I understand. The temporal rules in the divine river of time have been restraining me, making me go in circles. Zhuan murmured in a low voice. He glanced at the gray waves of time around him. The waves of time here were almost exactly the same as the waves of time when he first came here. In other words, the divine river of time had reversed the flow of time. No matter how many steps Zhuowen took forward, even if he exerted the spatial rules to the extreme, it would be useless. He would be reversed by the divine river of time to the place where he first came to Zhuan. If Zhuan wanted to step out of the divine river of time, the first thing he had to do was break the reversal of time. When Yao Xiangjuan saw Zhuowen's enlightened expression, he immediately remained silent for fear of disturbing Zhuowen. Boom! Zhuowen took a deep breath and then suddenly punched out. His fist was wrapped in gray energy. The gray energy looked extremely strange. This punch actually had a charm that could take one's soul away. And this charm seemed to be able to last forever, forever staying still in time. Bang! The fist contained a powerful rule of time. With one punch, the surrounding waves of time were all shattered. Like broken glass, they shattered into pieces. Chapter 23:15. Necklace. Boom, boom, boom. Zhuowen moved forward while throwing out punches with his right fist. His left hand hugged Yao Xiangjuan as he moved forward. Waves of time surged toward Zhuowen like angry dragons. They seemed to want to envelop Zhuowen and turn him into dust. Unfortunately, Zhuowen had finally comprehended the rules of time after being lost. With a punch, the waves of time were basically broken by Zhuowen. Zhuowen punched with every step he took. After taking 5 steps, he finally stepped onto the ground. Putting down Yao Xiangjuan, Zhuowen turned around and looked at the endless river of time behind him. He sighed softly in his heart. His entire body went limp on the ground, powerless. Fortunately, Yao Xiangjuan was quick to react. He grabbed Zhuowen's arms with both hands and tried to straighten him up. Unfortunately, Yao Xiangjuan was also deeply affected by the river of time. His actual situation was not much different from Zhuowen's. The moment Yao Xiangjuan grabbed Zhuowen, he knew something was wrong. Then, Zhuowen fell toward him. Yao Xiangjuan was powerless. He could only watch as Zhuowen fell and pressed him to the ground. At this moment, Yao Xiangjuan's cheeks were as red as a ripe apple. He was powerless and had no strength to move Zhuowen away. However, when he saw Zhuowen's white hair and fainted, Yao Xiangjuan gradually calmed down. He reached out and gently stroked Zhuowen's white hair. His gaze was complicated and moved. Yao Xiangjuan knew very well that if Zhuan were to cross the river of time alone, he would not be in such a sorry state. But this time, he brought him along, which made it more difficult for Zhuan to cross the river of time. What Yao Xiangjuan couldn't forget was that in the desperate situation of the divine river of time, he had originally planned to ask Zhuan to abandon him and cross the divine river of time alone. However, Zhuan had asked him to shut up and continue advancing on the divine river of time. At that moment, Zhuan's figure could no longer be erased from Yao Xiangjuan's mind. After resting for a while, the feeling of weakness in Yao Xiangjuan's body lessened a lot. He immediately moved, but just as he started to move, with a red face, Yao Xiangjuan gently released Zhuan's hands and laid Zhuan's body on the ground. Only then did he slowly stand up. At this moment, Yao Xiangjuan's long hair was completely scattered. Her beautiful face and messy long hair gave her a delicate appearance. Fortunately, this Zhuan has fainted. Otherwise, we might have been exposed. Moreover, after taking off the crystal necklace, Yao Xiangjuan's face became even more beautiful and enchanting. This was a kind of suffocating beauty. If others were to see such a face, they might really suffocate. It was simply too beautiful. Yao Xiangjuan gently pulled up her hair, then took out a small comb and gently combed her beautiful hair. After washing up, Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes fell on Zhuan. "Brother Zhua, thank you for helping me cross the river of time. Actually, I lied to you. Although there are two space-time heart, the clue I provided was actually only one space-time heart." Yao Xiangjuan sighed softly. Then, she took off the crystal necklace from her neck and put it on Zhuan's neck. This crystal necklace had an extremely obscure concealment ability. Relying on this crystal necklace, Yao Xiangjuan had never let outsiders see that he was actually a woman. Even the strongest of the Void Sky 9 steps might not be able to tell that Yao Xiangjuan's true identity was actually a woman. And the reason why Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation was so obscure naturally had a lot to do with this crystal necklace. Of course, Yao Xiangjuan knew that in addition to having an extremely powerful concealment ability, her necklace also had an even more important function. This was because this crystal necklace contained an extremely powerful life source. And this powerful life source was enough to allow Yao Xiangjuan to escape a fatal crisis. It could be said that it was Yao Xiangjuan's most important life-saving item. The space-time heart is very important to me. Brother Zhua, don't blame me for deceiving you. I am a person who doesn't like to owe others favors, but this time I owe you a huge favor. At present, I have no way to repay this favor. Take this life heart as a reward for your favor. At this point, Yao Xiangjuan gently put the crystal necklace on Zhuan's neck. Then, the green light in the crystal poured into Zhuan's chest. This green light contained an extremely rich life force. As this green light poured into Zhuan's body, the latter's withered skin began to moisten, and his white hair began to turn black. Zhuan's originally weak aura was like a dry land that had been moistened by rain and dew, gradually becoming stronger. Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhuan, whose aura was gradually growing stronger, and let out a light breath. Then she looked at Zhuan's side, stomped her right foot, and completely disappeared from where she was, rushing forward. Zhuan's eyelids slowly trembled, and then he opened them. Zhuan sat up, looked around blankly, and muttered in a low voice, "I fainted?" But soon, Zhuan noticed that there was an extremely strong life force in his chest, which was pouring into his body, causing a comfortable feeling to rise up from his body. "What is this?" Zhuan held up the crystal necklace in front of his chest with his right hand, looked at the crystal necklace in his palm with bright eyes, and said in surprise, "What a powerful life force! What exactly is this necklace?" Zhuan's eyes revealed a look of surprise. The life force that emerged from this crystal necklace was simply something he had never seen before in his life. Needless to say, Zhuan knew that this crystal necklace was absolutely priceless. Chapter 23:16. Beauty is poisonous. Did Brother Yao give this to me? Zhuan thought of something and wanted to look for Yao Xiangjuan, but he found that there was no one around. Zhuan frowned. He was sure that Yao Xiangjuan had given him the crystal necklace, But where did Yao Xiangjuan go after leaving the necklace behind? Yao Xiangjuan still had the clue to the space-time hollow. Now that Yao Xiangjuan had disappeared, it meant that the clue to the space-time hollow was gone. Juan was worried that something might have happened to Yao Xiangjuan. However, the area was gray and it was difficult to identify the direction. Looking for a person here was like looking for a needle in a haystack. So I should go look for the space-time key first. Maybe I can meet Brother Yao on the way. Juan sighed and took out the yellow map from his spirit ring. The destination of the map was the location of the space-time key, and Juan found that the location on the map was not far from here. After confirming the location, Juan moved and left the place in an instant. Along the way, Juan's eyes became more and more serious. He was sure that this place should be the third region of the river of space-time quicksand, the space-time law region, because he felt the space-time law and the space-time law at the same time in this space. The two great laws were independent yet interdependent. This subtle relationship caused Zhuo Wen, who was hurrying along, to suffer a lot. In this space where the space-time law and the space-time law coexisted, there was the infinite space in the space-time law region, and there was also the rapid flow of time in the space-time law region. This greatly slowed down Zhuo Wen's progress. However, Zhuan had comprehended the space-time law and the space-time law. Although this space where the space-time law and the space-time law coexisted was difficult to deal with, Zhuan could barely deal with it and continued to move forward. Zhuan moved forward for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, he was also comprehending the coexistence of the space-time law and the space-time law in this place. However, the more he researched, the more he realized that it would be very difficult for the time and space laws to coexist. At the very least, he was unable to grasp the laws behind them. Of course, the more Zhuan researched, the more he admired the expert who had created the space-time temple and the space-time key. He knew that mastering the space-time law was probably not as simple as comprehending a trace of the heavenly Tao law. To a certain extent, the path to mastering the space-time law was much more difficult than comprehending a trace of the heavenly Tao law. This was because space-time contained the laws of time and space. Moreover, after you fully comprehended these two laws, you had to try to find the pattern between these two laws. Only by grasping this pattern could you touch the threshold of the space-time law. However, this was only the threshold of the space-time law. There was still a long way to go before he could fully grasp the space-time law. Although the laws of heavenly Tao were fraught with difficulties, reaching the 9 steps void sky steps only required one to grasp a wisp of the laws of heavenly Tao. In terms of difficulty, it was indeed slightly easier than completely grasping the laws of space-time. Moreover, the steps were not as complicated as the laws of space-time. It was no wonder that many cultivators who reached the 9 steps void sky ascension relied on comprehending a trace of the heavenly Tao. After all, this method was the most convenient and simple. Of course, there were many benefits to mastering the space-time law to reach the 9 steps void sky. The complete space-time law was much stronger than a trace of the heavenly Tao law. Even if the heavenly Tao law was superior to the space-time law, it was only a trace of the heavenly Tao law. Naturally, it could not be compared to the complete space-time law. Of course, many cultivators did not know about this, and Juan had only heard about it from Ma Yujie. At first, he didn't believe the damn fatty, but now that he had comprehended the time and space laws, he began to believe the damn fatty's words. Su Tiannindeng, who had grasped the space-time law, was much stronger than Su Tiannindeng, who had grasped a trace of the heavenly Tao. 3 days later, Zhuo stopped in his tracks. His gaze landed in front of him. A magnificent world appeared in front of Zhuo. It was different from the gloomy and dim aura of the other places. Standing there, Zhuo felt like he was standing on a beach where the sun was about to set below the sea level. The red sunset glow was like a rainbow that formed a rainbow bridge over the distant sea. It also looked like a flame that was devouring the sea level. It looked magnificent and majestic. At the farthest point of the sunset clouds, a cliff slowly rose above the sea level as if it was sending off the last touch of the sunset. Zhuo frowned slightly. He looked at the magnificent sunset scenery in front of him and felt a sense of awe. The sun sets in the west. The heartbroken person is at the end of the world. Suddenly, This poem involuntarily appeared in Zhuowen's mind. A feeling of sadness and twilight gradually rose in his heart. This was a lament about the passage of time and the absence of return. It was also a sigh about how time had flown by. Everything in the world, no matter how poor they were, was equal and the same when the sun set. The past, the present, the future, everything would eventually pass away. Just like the beautiful sunset, everything would eventually fall. Zhuowen stood silently under this beautiful sunset. He quietly looked at the sunset hanging above the sea level for 3 days and 3 nights. For 3 days and 3 nights, the sunset quietly hung high above the sea level. It did not set, nor did it show any signs of setting. It was as if time had stopped at the last moment of the sunset. Zhuowen's eyes showed that he was pondering. Then he took out the map from the spirit ring again and carefully observed the location of the space-time key on the map. After confirming it again and again, Zhuowen found that the location of the space-time key was on the sea level under the beautiful sunset. Putting away the map, Zhuowen looked at the sunset in the distance again and sighed. This sunset in the west is beautiful, but behind the beauty is infinite danger. Beauty is actually poisonous. But the helpless thing is that even if it is poisonous, I have to go in and try. How ironic. Having said that, Zhuowen took a step forward and jumped into the strange sea. What surprised Zhuowen was that the instant his feet landed on the surface of the sea, he discovered that the surface of the sea was actually still. Although it looked like a gentle sea, it had actually been completely frozen at this moment by time, and Zhuowen stepped into this place as if he was walking on flat ground. Not only that, the moment Zhuowen entered the sea surface, he found that his consciousness was actually infinitely suppressed. Originally, his consciousness could extend hundreds of millions of miles without a problem, but after entering the sea surface, his consciousness could only extend to a range of 10 miles. Moreover, Zhuowen felt that not only was his consciousness suppressed, but he was also surrounded by an endless vicissitude of time. Zhuowen was all too familiar with this feeling. It was the same feeling as the time law area. It was the feeling of time passing. Moreover, the passage of time in the sunset area was much faster than in the time law area. With the passage of time, Zhuowen also found that the surrounding space was constantly changing. Zhuowen looked at the sunset in front of him and found that it was sometimes far and sometimes near. Chapter 23:17. The setting sun. Taking a deep breath, Zhuowen began to move forward. The place where the setting sun stopped was the location of the space-time key that Zhuowen knew to be. However, Zhuowen knew very well that it would be extremely difficult to approach the end of the setting sun. Day after day passed. Zhuowen walked on the surface of the sea for over a month, but the end of the setting sun was still so far away. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that time passed even faster than before. If it weren't for the Heart of Life necklace on his chest providing him with an endless supply of vitality, Zhuowen knew that he might have already shown signs of aging. Finally, Zhuowen stopped. His eyes flickered as he said softly, "I can't keep going like this. There's a powerful law of space-time here. Time and space are fused together. Time is flying, and space is also switching." Zhuowen knew that it would be pointless for him to keep going like this. He would probably lose himself under the beautiful setting sun. I have to find the pattern between the laws of time and space. Otherwise, I won't be able to take a single step here. Zhuowen calmed down as he spoke. Then he took out a praying mat and sat down cross-legged on it. He began to study the pattern and flow of laws in the sea of setting sun. Zhuowen had completely comprehended the laws of time and space, but he was still rather ignorant about the laws of space-time. However, Zhuowen firmly believed that as long as he could understand the laws of time and space, he would be able to truly enter the threshold of the laws of space-time. At that time, Zhuowen would not be unable to take a single step in the sea of setting sun. Time ticked by. Zhuowen sat upright on the meditation cushion and concentrated on pondering the laws of space and time in the surroundings, and his gaze revealed an expression of deep thought. Zhuowen sat like this for 3 whole years. During these 3 years, he studied the laws of space-time without moving at all. It was as if he was possessed. Finally, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. His eyes shone with a dazzling light. In the past 3 years, although Zhuan still didn't understand the space-time rules, he had some understanding of the laws of time and space operating at the same time. Although he only understood a little, it was a big step for Zhuan. At least now that he understood this pattern, Zhuan knew that he wouldn't get lost in the sea of sunset anymore. Zhuan stood up and put away the praying mat, but his eyes fell on the necklace with the heart of life on it. The surface of the necklace was still emitting a green light, but compared to the beginning, the green light was much dimmer. Clearly, in the past 3 years, the surging vitality of the necklace had been greatly depleted. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the setting sun was. In just 3 years, it had already depleted the vitality of the heart of life to such an extent. Of course, it was also thanks to this heart of life that Zhuan could quietly go into seclusion to comprehend the laws of time and space. Otherwise, with the influence of the terrifying power of the setting sun, it would have been difficult for Zhuan to comprehend the laws of time and space with peace of mind. However, the heart of life gave him a good environment. This was also why Zhuan could touch the threshold of the space-time rules in 3 years. Of course, there was still a big gap from the real space-time rules, and Zhuan knew this. Taking a deep breath, Zhuan temporarily took off the heart of life and put it in the spirit ring. He had already determined that this heart of life belonged to Yao Xiangjuan. Now that he had consumed it for 3 years, the vitality inside was actually not much. If he continued to wear it, he was afraid that the vitality of the heart of life would be completely exhausted. Zhuan still planned to return this heart of life to Yao Xiangjuan after he found him. Naturally, he couldn't squander all the vitality in the heart of life. Otherwise, when he saw Yao Xiangjuan, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. After putting away the heart of life, Zhuan clearly felt the terrifying feeling of time passing. When he stepped out, the surrounding space produced a strange and powerful pressure. Moreover, the cooperation of time and space in this place was extremely tacit. Zhuan actually felt that his hands and feet were tied. It seems that this necklace really has a big effect. Zhuan smiled bitterly. He didn't expect that after taking off the necklace, he would feel so uncomfortable. At least, he was not used to this kind of feeling of being tied up. Now he was even more certain that this necklace given to him by Yao Xiangjuan was definitely an extraordinary divine object. However, he was surprised that Yao Xiangjuan would leave this thing to him and leave without saying goodbye. Could it be that there was some secret behind it? However, Zhuan vaguely guessed that Yao Xiangjuan might have something to do with the heart of time and space. Of course, no matter what Yao Xiangjuan thought, Zhuan was still very grateful to Yao Xiangjuan for giving him this necklace. Otherwise, Zhuan wouldn't have recovered so quickly and wouldn't have been so relaxed after entering the Sea of Sunset. Now that Zhuan had touched the threshold of the space-time law, even without the necklace, he wouldn't feel too strange. More importantly, at least he wouldn't get lost in this beautiful sunset as easily as before. For the next period of time, Zhuan basically walked in the Sea of Sunset. And because Zhuan had touched the threshold of the space-time law, he was no longer lost in this sea like before. The sunset at the end of the sea was also not as far away as before, no matter how far Zhuan went. At least Zhuan could now feel that he was slowly approaching the sunset at the end of the sea. Of course, the closer he got to the sunset, Zhuan realized that the flow of time was faster and the restrictions of space were stronger. The suppression of space-time was also stronger. Gradually, Zhuan's skin started to age, and his hair gradually turned white. He was gradually aging under the suppression of space-time. When Zhuan finally arrived in front of the cliff under the setting sun, he had completely become a white-haired old man, and his vitality was constantly being taken away. Although Zhuan now looked like an old man in his twilight years, his eyes became brighter and clearer. Standing in front of the cliff, Zhuan looked at the cliff in front of him and fell into deep thought. The cliff in front of him stood on the sea under the setting sun. Zhuan noticed that this cliff was extremely high. If he looked carefully, he could see that the base of the cliff should be at the bottom of the Sea of Sunset. Chapter 23:18. Time is eternal. Zhuan stared at the cliff in front of him with bright eyes. Once again, he thought of the poem that he had sighed with emotion. The sun sets in the west, and the heartbroken man is at the end of the world. This seemingly endless cliff that went straight into the clouds was probably the so-called end of the world, and the space-time key that Juan was looking for should be here. Thinking of this, Juan pushed off with his right foot and plunged into the sea around the cliff. The seawater in other places had already been frozen by time. Only the seawater in this area was still flowing, and Juan was able to enter the base of the cliff through the flowing seawater. Although Juan didn't know what was at the base of the cliff, he had a feeling that the space-time key should be there. Of course, all of this was just his intuition. Juan had to go down and see for himself whether it was true or not. The moment Juan plunged into the sea, he felt a bone-chilling coldness on his face. This coldness made Juan's whole body shiver, and his body aged even faster. Clearly, the speed at which time passed in the sea was even more terrifying than on the surface. Juan had no choice but to take out the necklace that Yao Xiangjuan had given him. He knew that with the speed at which time passed, Juan would probably die of old age before he could reach the bottom of the sea. Therefore, he had no choice but to borrow the power of the necklace. After putting on the necklace, the aging speed of Juan's body slowed down a lot. Moreover, relying on the surging vitality of the necklace, Juan even started to become younger. Juan looked at the necklace with a pained expression. The green light wasn't very bright, and he knew that although the vitality of the necklace wasn't much, it should be enough for him to last for quite some time. However, he was helpless because the vitality was decreasing every time he used it. This time, he was afraid that he would have to use up a lot of the vitality of the necklace. If he used up the necklace, Juan would be too embarrassed to meet Yao Xiangjuan again. Soon, Juan dived to the bottom of the sea. Then he saw a shocking scene at the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea was simply a world of ice. Except for the several feet around the cliff which was seawater, the surrounding was a world of frozen ice and snow. Juan knew that the world of ice and snow around him was not really the power of ice and snow, but the power of time stagnation. When the seawater was still at a certain point in time, it would solidify as if it was frozen by cold air, forming an extremely low-temperature ice-like object. The surrounding seawater also followed the same principle. In addition, Juan also saw many creatures in this world of ice and snow. Most of them were marine creatures. However, he also saw many cultivators. These cultivators were frozen in the sea, motionless. Juan's gaze turned solemn. He discovered that most of the frozen cultivators' auras weren't weak. There were even a few cultivators whose auras weren't any weaker than Quang Li from the quicksand family. Clearly, this cultivator was most likely a half-step void sky 9th ascension expert. Furthermore, these cultivators were arranged in a very orderly manner. They actually surrounded the bottom of the cliff in a circular formation. Juan guessed that the range of seawater around the cliff wasn't just a few feet. It was very likely that it was hundreds of feet, or even thousands of feet. However, for some unknown reason, the nearby seawater was frozen in time, and the cultivators who were still in the sea were unfortunately frozen in time with the seawater. Juan looked around, and his gaze became more and more solemn. He felt that the bottom of the cliff wasn't simple. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to freeze so many cultivators. Juan's attention quickly fell on a remote corner on the left. In the ice and snow closest to the seawater, a beautiful figure completely attracted Juan's attention. This was an extremely beautiful woman. The reason why she attracted Juan's attention wasn't because of her beautiful appearance, but because she was no stranger to Juan. Yao Xiangjuan? Juan frowned slightly. This beautiful woman was the beautiful woman that Juan had met in the space law area before. At that time, this beautiful woman claimed to be Yao Xiangjuan's sister. Previously, Juan had gone to a secret realm with Yao Xiangjuan and found a large number of spatial crystals inside. At that time, Juan had a pretty good impression of Yao Xiangjuan. However, Juan felt that something was strange. Why was Yao Xiangjuan at the bottom of the cliff? If he remembered correctly, Yao Xiangjuan shouldn't be able to cross the Time Divine River. It was already very good that she could enter the Time Law area. However, Yao Xiangjuan had entered the bottom of the cliff before him and was frozen in time in the seawater. This made Juan even more puzzled. Sizing up Yao Xiangjuan, who was trapped in time, Zhuowen's gaze quickly fell on Yao Xiangjuan's right hand. He saw that Yao Xiangjuan was holding a transparent crystal the size of half a palm. Upon closer inspection, the shape of this transparent crystal was somewhat similar to a heart. Space-time hollow. Zhuan looked at the transparent crystal in Yao Xiangjuan's palm and recalled the space-time hollow that Yao Xiangjuan had mentioned to him before. He quickly associated the two. Yao Xiangjuan's time should have frozen not long ago. What happened here at that time? Zhuan thought to himself. However, he became more and more vigilant. He saw unwillingness and fear in Yao Xiangjuan's open eyes. What happened at that time that made Yao Xiangjuan reveal such an expression? Just as Zhuan was lost in thought, an extremely horrifying feeling rose from Zhuowen's feet and rushed along his spine to the back of Zhuowen's head. This feeling was too strong. It was definitely a feeling that Zhuowen had never felt before. It was as if his lifeline had been strangled by an invisible force at this moment. What is your purpose in entering the bottom of the space-time cliff? A deep voice slowly sounded in Zhuowen's ears, but Zhuowen could not tell where the voice came from. You only have 3 breaths of time. If you don't give me an answer, you will end up like those cultivators. The deep voice sounded again, but there was a trace of impatience in the voice. Zhuowen took a deep breath and said helplessly, I'm here for the space-time key. The deep voice was silent for a moment, but then it laughed loudly, You are very honest. Puchi. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood. His chest felt as if it had been hit hard, and he was suddenly sent flying and smashed into the edge of the cliff behind him. Because the force was too great, Zhuowen's whole body was embedded in the cliff wall. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of horror. His face was as pale as snow, and the will to resist in his heart had completely disappeared. This unknown power was too terrifying. In front of this power, Zhuowen actually felt powerless. It was as if he was an ant facing a vast ocean. Back then, when Zhuowen faced Great Brahma and Mu Chenxue, whose temperament had changed drastically, he did not feel this way. But now, facing this unknown force, he actually felt this strange feeling. Chapter 23:19. Mysterious Head. Who are you? Zhuowen's entire body was embedded in the rock wall. He wanted to break free from the rock wall, but he found that there were many stone hands stretching out from the rock wall, grabbing Zhuowen's limbs and neck, firmly fixing him in the rock wall. These stone hands were not ordinary stone hands, but stone hands that contained extremely powerful space-time laws. The moment Zhuowen's limbs were grabbed by these stone hands, he felt that time and space were completely sealed, and he could not move at all. Zhuowen raised his head, his pupils constricting into needles as he stared straight ahead. It was unknown when, but a huge head had appeared in front of them. This head was as big as Zhuowen's entire body. However, its face was glistening with blood, and it looked exceptionally ferocious and terrifying. It was almost to the point of being badly mutilated. Moreover, Zhuowen also found that this huge head had only one eye, and the left eye was incomplete, leaving only an empty bloody hole, from which thick black blood was constantly flowing. The right eye was quite strange. The white of the eye was blood red, and the pupil was golden. When the pupil blinked, an extremely strange blood flame would spurt out. The moment he saw the right eye of this head, Zhuowen's pupils unconsciously shrank, because this was not the first time he had seen this right eye, but the second time. Back then, when he was in the Sun-Moon Lake, he had entered a strange, small world. There was a blood-stained cliff, and an eyeball was suppressed in that cliff. That eyeball was exactly the same as the right eye of the head in front of him. There was no doubt that this eyeball should be the empty left eye of this head. It must be known that Ma Yujie had guessed that the eyeball suppressed in the blood-stained cliff should be the eyeball of a Tao-confirming powerhouse. Tao-confirming powerhouses were even more terrifying than Su Tianjudeng. Zhuowen was very clear that this bloody head in front of him was a Tao-confirming powerhouse. Although this bloody head did not seem to have any harmful power, Zhuowen knew that as long as this head wanted to, it could kill him. You've seen me? The mangled head took a deep look at Zhuowen before it slowly opened its mouth and said. Zhuowen frowned but didn't say anything. The head in front of him was too terrifying. It could kill him as easily as squashing an ant. Zhuan didn't dare to say anything. Do you want me to search your soul? Are you still not going to speak? The head said coldly. Zhuan sneered again and again, but he still didn't say anything. If this head could search one's soul, it probably wouldn't waste any words with him and would directly search his soul. However, the head hadn't done so. Instead, it had asked Zhuan to say it himself. This meant that the head didn't have the ability to search his soul. I said yes, but I also want to ask you a question. Zhuan said in a deep voice. The head narrowed its eyes. It was a little surprised that the little cultivator in front of it was not only not frightened by it, but also fearlessly raised conditions with it. Interesting. Answer my question first. After the head finished speaking, it noticed Zhuan remained indifferent, and it said with slight displeasure, Don't worry, I always keep my word. It's impossible for me to go back on my word. The head obviously paused for a moment when it spoke of its name, and Zhuan suspected that the head's memories were missing or had been sealed by someone. Otherwise, it was impossible for it to even forget its name. All right, Zhuan agreed, and then he pondered for a moment before he said, I once saw an eyeball on a bloodied cliff, and this eyeball was exactly the same as your eyeball. There was a pool of true dragon blood at the side of that bloodied cliff, and an enormous heart was sealed within that pool of blood. When he spoke up to hear, Zhuan recalled the words he'd heard on the bloodied cliff that day, and he couldn't help but mutter, Return my heart. Return my eyes. Return my arms. Return my legs. Return everything to me. Boom. After Zhuo Wengang finished speaking, a terrifying thunderous voice suddenly resounded. Then, a terrifying gust of wind came crashing down like a 10,000 zhang tall mountain. Zhuowen, who was embedded in the rock wall, was the closest to the head. Immediately, his chest was blasted open by this terrifying gust of wind. Blood gushed out, and he was seriously injured. If it weren't for the necklace on Zhuowen's chest, which had a strong vitality, Zhuowen wouldn't have been able to keep his life. In addition, Zhuowen's whole body was bound, and he couldn't take out the heavenly domain star essence, so the necklace on his body could really be said to have saved Zhuowen's life. When Zhuowen's blasted chest gradually recovered in the green light, the necklace on Zhuowen's chest finally became completely dim and lost its last trace of vitality. Zhuowen sighed softly. He knew that the necklace was now completely useless, but at the same time he was shocked by the terror of this head. Just the aura it revealed almost killed him. If it weren't for this necklace, Zhuowen would have been doomed. Perhaps noticing Zhuowen's strange state, the head restrained its powerful aura and looked at Zhuowen excitedly. It said in a deep voice, Do you know where my eyes are? Zhuowen took a deep breath. He didn't dare to talk in riddles. This head was too terrifying, and he really didn't dare to neglect it. If this guy was angry, its aura would be even more terrifying. It's suppressed in a blood-stained cliff, but it's very far from here. It's not in the Six Desires heavenly domain, but in another heavenly domain, Zhuowen said in a deep voice. I didn't expect you to have clues about my eyes. Little brat, as long as you can help me get my eyes and heart back, I will give you a great fortune, the head said with a burning gaze. Zhuowen sneered in his heart and said indifferently, Senior, why don't you take a look at my current situation? I'm trapped here by you. How can I help you get your eyes and heart back? And if I'm not wrong, you should be a Tao proving expert. Even if it's your eyes, I can't bring them back. I'm too weak. The head was stunned. Immediately, it saw Zhuowen's situation and calmed down completely. What you said is not unreasonable. After the head finished speaking, Zhuowen felt his limbs loosen. Immediately, the stone hands that grabbed his limbs slowly retracted into the rock wall and disappeared completely. You came here for the space-time key? The head asked indifferently. Zhuowen nodded, but his gaze was on guard as he looked at the mangled head. I'm afraid you don't know the price of coming here. Look at those guys. Most of them came for the space-time key. Of course, a small part of them came for the space-time core. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.